Welcome to the sleep haunt. Tonight, the open road stretches farther than sight, carrying 10 true disturbing trucker horror stories tales gathered from silent highways, lonely rest stops, and endless miles where the dark feels alive. These stories don't rush. They breathe slowly, whispering through the hum of the engine and the silence between miles, lingering long after the journey ends. Stay until the final story, where each road meets the next, and the last echo fades like headlights swallowed by the night. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the glass. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Story number 1. He was used to the way the Great Plains pretended to be simple. The land looked empty, a dark ocean of grass, but it held weather and distance like secrets. Ben Harlow had been running paper rolls to a distribution hub outside Topeka for 2 decades. He liked the route, long, straight, and steady, with a sky that could cradle a person into calm if the radio was gentle and the coffee warm. He drove without hurry, easing across the state line not long after midnight, when the stars felt closer than streetlights and every town was reduced to a few soft lights and the suggestion of sleep. The CB murmured weather bands and the soft patter of other drivers swapping rest stop recommendations. Somewhere behind him, a storm massed and flashed, too far off to make him choose a different road. His trailer was loaded just under 30,000 pounds, strapped clean and tight, no mysteries. He'd been meticulous, because that was the kind of quiet that kept a person alive. In the dark, the horizon dipped and lifted, and he counted mile markers like dim beads. It was the kind of night that usually softened his thoughts and made an hour pass like a minute. He saw the first sign too late to dismiss it. A green reflective panel, plain as daylight, proclaiming Prairie Bend Way Station 1 mile. He hadn't thought about Prairie Bend in years. It had been shuttered, gutted, and boarded up. Everyone knew that. He even remembered the last time he'd passed the empty lot, the chain across the entryway sagging like a tired rope, the canopy birds nesting in the rafters. He'd eaten a sandwich there once, parked along the shoulder, listening to wind-push tumbleweeds in circles. A second sign flashed by. Open all trucks. The LED looked newer than he expected. Crisp. That particular cold color that felt more like a screen than a sign. He glanced at his clock. 12:07. He checked the radio, maybe hoping for a voice explaining a temporary inspection. Nothing. But the rule was the rule. If it was open, he went in. Even old ghosts of way stations had a way of sending tickets to the living world. He took the off-ramp slow, the trailer sighing over the slight grade, and rolled into a layout that was both familiar and not. The lanes were newly painted, bright, without a scuff of tire or an oil stain. Yet the lights over the lot buzzed with that high, breathy hum of fluorescent tubes that had seen too many winters. He eased onto the scale. The truck settled. In the cab's quiet, he could hear the tires tick as they cooled, and far away the distant thunder gave a respectful growl. The display lit. His gross rolled up to a number that made him frown. It was heavy. 2,000 pounds heavy. He checked his manifest, rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper, as if the weight could flake off like graphite. He checked again. The rolls stacked even, the straps snug. He knew to trust the scale, but he also knew this was wrong. The thought came and passed like a cloud. Had they slip-loaded him? No. He watched them load. He watched everything. The intercom by the pole crackled. The speaker looked old, greenish plastic with a web of hairline cracks. But the voice that came through was clean, polite, and close enough to normal that it didn't land wrong right away. Bay 3, it said. Open your trailer for inspection. He looked toward the building. The windows were lit but empty. No silhouettes moved behind glass. The office doors stood closed, a sign reading check-in in block letters above them. The bay doors were numbered. 3 hung half open, as if it had just begun to rise for him. He pulled forward. The tires made that soft whisper over painted lines. He stopped where the yellow stanchions asked him to stop. The wind moved in a way that suggested a door being opened somewhere. He climbed down, the step creaking like an old friend. He walked back past the trailer wheels, gloved hand trailing the aluminum, and put the key to the lock. He heard only the small, honest sounds of cargo, and Steele the low shift of weight bumping into equilibrium, the creak of a strap settling against its own buckle. Then something else, too quiet to be sure. A drag like fabric on cardboard, or the sigh of air slipping out from a rolled edge. He paused. The wind shifted. He told himself he was listening for someone about to greet him politely and tell him to unlatch, swing wide. He swung wide. The interior smelt of pulp and the paper's faint starch, a clean smell, not unpleasant. His flashlight knifed along the rolls. The beam slid over pale loops and the black belts that kept them honest. Nothing was wrong. The sound didn't repeat. He propped the door with the latch and stepped back. The intercom above the door clicked again, a breath before words. "Step back from the trailer," it said, as if the person inside knew exactly where he stood. "Remain clear. Inspection in progress." He obeyed. He had no reason not to. He searched for a camera and found one tucked under the eaves, barely the size of his palm, its lens a glassy insect eye. It watched without blinking. In the bay, fans whispered. Somewhere, a printer cycled and stilled. He looked for a person and saw none. A monitor inside the office came alive. He could see it through the window on the side of the building, the glow white-blue and painterly against the glass. The image looked like a thermal feed, false color patches floating and cooling and warming again. A bright rectangle outlined his trailer. The rolls showed as gentle grays, even mild. But thin, hand-shaped shadows bloomed and faded like breath on a mirror along the edges of the cargo. He told himself the software sometimes fantasized anomalies to justify itself. Automation loved to find something. It made the whole apparatus feel necessary. A bell he couldn't see chimed once, and the bay door inched down half an inch, then rose again, as if the system had tried to close and changed its mind. He rubbed his hands together and reminded himself to be patient. A glance at his dashboard clock through the windshield made no sense. It still read 12:07. He tapped the glass. The second hand twitched, then stopped. The digital on the GPS agreed. A coincidence, he decided. Probably the unit had chosen this spot to freeze. He'd reboot it when he got rolling again. The radio on the dash whispered, a voice out of nowhere, full of old slang, a soft drawl smoothed by 1,000 night miles. "Prairie Bend in the green tonight. Bring it on, bring it through." The channel hissed. He hadn't switched anything. He reached and thumbed the volume. The voice didn't come back, but it lived in the static like a shape under ice. He walked to the office door and tried the handle. It moved, but only a little, like a door proudly locked. He peered inside at a room that could have been staged from a memory. A coffee pot sat half full on a warmer that glowed the low red of an ember. A stack of forms waited patiently beside pens that had not been uncapped recently. An ashtray sat empty and clean, though he'd never known this place in an era when that might have been normal. At the edge of the corkboard on the far wall hung a child's drawing of a truck. Big wheels, blocky windows, smiling sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Above it, a thumbtacked photo of a family at a county fair was fading the way old photos fade, into colors more dream than print. He turned. The barrier arm at the exit held its polite line across the lane. A red light on its side glowed. Behind him, the bay had gone dark for a moment, and then relit, as if someone had walked across its sensors. He thought, briefly and unwisely, of just going. He could swing around the barrier and try his luck. But he didn't like how that thought felt in his hands. He went back to the trailer. He crouched and checked the pins, the coupler, the gaskets, the valves. He ran a palm along a brake line and felt it solid and cold. He tugged each strap and listened for a telling sound. Everything behaved. He shone the light up into the shadowed crown of the empty space above the paper. Dust drifted, lazy as snow. The kind of dust that only exists in quiet rooms. From the corner of his eye, a shape moved. He swung the light on it, heart bumping once, in a way that echoed in his wrists. The shape was nothing but his own breath, making the beam look thick for a second. He laughed softly and stopped laughing when the CB spat out words like a cough. "Keep your distance. You're too close to load." The voice sounded older this time, older than the wires carrying it, like it had traveled a long way to get into his cab. He closed the trailer. The latch snapped home with a sound that told him the world still had rules. He walked back to the cab. On the driver's seat lay a paper he didn't remember leaving there. He knew his own mess. It was too tidy to be his. He picked it up. It was a violation notice, plain as day, dated with a year he tried and failed to convince himself was a misprint. The driver's name on the top line tickled a place behind his eyes. He placed it on the dash and stared until the memory settled. A plaque at a truck stop west of here. A small, quiet corner with a flag and a photo, placed in honor of a driver who hadn't come home after a rollover near Prairie Bend. He had read it while his coffee cooled, and thought about the mercy of good roads. He put the paper down and went back to the trailer again, because the idea had stuck. He checked the fifth wheel and found it as it should be, the kingpin seated like a handshake. He checked the landing gear crank, and found it stowed but not latched, which wasn't like him. He latched it. He checked the secondary latch on the doors and found one not fully engaged, as if his glove had slipped and he hadn't noticed. He engaged it. He told himself that the difference between superstition and prudence was a well-lit walk-around. He kept walking. The wind rose and fell, each gust shaped like a careful thought. On the office window, the thermal screen washed itself clean and repainted the inside of his trailer with polite colors. No hand shapes now, just Avon Gray. He exhaled. His breath misted faintly, and he shrugged his collar higher without meaning to. A trucker years ago had told him a story about a scale house that never closed, not because the state demanded it, but because the place itself couldn't let go of its last night of work. In that story, the agents never came out, but the doors opened and closed, the printers printed, and the scales told the truth no one wanted to hear. He hadn't believed it. He didn't work nights, because he believed in stories. He worked nights because it paid, and because the quiet kept him. And yet, he climbed into the cab again and turned the key to cycle the dash. The needles fluttered to life and settled. The GPS woke reluctantly. The clock ticked once, then twice, and landed on 12:07 once more. He set the phone on the mount and checked the time there. Different network, different clock. 12:07. It wasn't much of a magic trick. Just enough to try his patience. He put his hands on the wheel and sat, letting the seat take his weight. Thunder rolled closer, like a tired truck in a low gear. Lightning stitched a seam along the horizon. On the CB, a different voice, younger, a little unsure, asked, "Prairie Bend, you see me?" A second's pause. The older voice replied, gentle as a hand on a shoulder, "I see you." The line cleared. The radio went polite. He cracked the window and listened. The night around the way station had the stillness of a library after closing. Somewhere in the grass, a cricket decided work hours were over, and called once, and not again. Over the building, moths circled the lights in slow, purposeful loops. He watched them and almost dozed. Then the barrier arm lifted, as if deciding at last to be reasonable. The red dot on its side changed to green. The intercom by the scale pole clicked, and the same clean voice from earlier said, "Proceed when ready." He looked toward the office and thought he saw a figure moving in the reflection of the glass. But when he squinted, it was just the ghost of his own truck flickering in the monitor's glow. He let out the breath he'd been holding, put the truck in gear, and eased forward. The scale's numbers rolled down to what they should have been all along. He didn't understand what had changed because nothing had, except that now everything was correct. He passed the office and saw the coffee pot turned off. The warmer's red ember had gone dark. The monitor showed nothing but his taillights passing like twin suns in a patient universe. He merged onto the highway with the smoothness of a long habit, and the storm did him the courtesy of staying behind. The ramp flattened into the open road. He checked the mirror and found the entrance to Prairie Bend, hidden by the slope of the land and the polite angle of the guardrail. He thought, for a moment, of making a U-turn at the next safe opportunity and driving back, just to prove it had happened. Then the sign for the next exit slid by, and he let the thought go. He glanced at the passenger seat. The violation paper lay there, folded in half, white against the dark. He reached for it, and found instead a maintenance checklist, clean and blank, the kind the company sent with new hires. He put it back down. He didn't like the thought of turning on the dome light just to chase a piece of stationery into clarity. He preferred thinking it through in the dark. The CB crackled one last time with the old drawl, soft enough to make him think he'd invented it. Safe roads. No call sign, no location, just two words that landed like an instrument being set carefully on a table. He smiled despite himself and shook his head the way a person does when a very minor thing makes them feel more grateful than it should. Miles later, a boarded building loomed in the right-hand distance with a faded sign leaning against a fence. Prairie Bend Weight Check closed by order of the state. The boards had been on the windows for years. Weeds had settled into the lot, high and confident, and a vine had taken its time climbing the side door. A long dead light fixture hung by a single screw, pointing at the ground like a finger. He drove on, because that was the only direction anyone ever got. When he reached the yard near Topeka, he parked, logged, and stretched in the dusk blue of the early morning. He rolled his shoulders and opened his trailer to a delivery clerk with a tablet who didn't care about ghosts. The rolls came off in tidy order. The clerk signed. It was exactly the kind of morning that made night drives feel like memories instead of hours. Days later, his route crossed paths with another driver's at a diner with a counter that held as much local history as coffee. This driver talked about a truck that had rolled on the turn near Prairie Bend the week before, a simple mistake in weight distribution on a curve that didn't look like it could tip a toy. No one had been hurt, not badly. But the old tales were awake again, and people liked talking. Ben listened without weighing the other man's words down with his own. He finished his eggs and nodded in all the right places. When he went to pay, the cashier's counter held a small newspaper clipping in a plastic sleeve, years old. About the driver remembered on that plaque he'd seen, smiling in the frozen time of newsprint. On his next run, as flat and calm as wheat, the prairie always looking like a body just breathed under it, he saw the green reflective panel that should not have been there. It held the light the way a pond holds sky. It promised Prairie Bend Way Station 1 mile. He blinked long, like changing photographs in his own head. And when his eyes opened, the sign was gone, replaced by a mile marker that did not know any stories. The sky gentled, the road ran straighter, and he kept going, careful enough to make whoever watched over him feel unnecessary. That night, while he checked his pins by the light of a truck stop canopy, the valves and bolts, shining like faithful habits, he thought about the way the scale numbers had corrected themselves when nothing else would, and about the way his own hand had latched what he thought had been latched before. It occurred to him then that a way station didn't have to be haunted to be helpful. Maybe it remembered what it was built to do, and maybe some places didn't know how to forget their work. He wasn't a person who chased mysteries. He liked clear windshields and clean logbooks. He kept to speed and checked his mirrors, because truck stops kept candles burning in the quiet corners for those who didn't. But when thunder spoke low and polite somewhere in the distance, he could not help answering in a way that had nothing to do with his radio. He answered by dropping a mile an hour beneath his usual pace, by giving the wide curve a little more respect than he had in a younger year, by choosing the kind of patience that looked like he was giving up something but wasn't. On the CB sometimes, very late when the stations had given themselves over to weather and playlists, a voice would thread the static with old phrases that made veteran drivers nod without realizing. It never said much. It didn't need to. The road said enough, wrote itself across wind and grass and blacktop in long letters that no one could read quickly. He listened and drove, and sometimes at the edge of a rest area, he would see a moth batting a yellow light in the exact same slow circle he had seen it make at Prairie Bend, and he would think, well, maybe. And the next time he slid across a scale anywhere, and the numbers rose toward too much, he would feel his shoulders loosen instead of clench, because he knew to walk around, to check again, to accept the nudge that comes from a place with no hands. He never went back looking for the station. He didn't need to. The story had chosen the miles it wanted. He carried it with him, like a spare fuse in the glove box, like a pen clipped to the visor. It didn't hurt. And on nights when the prairie smoothed itself into sleep all the way to the horizon, it helped. He told no one. He didn't talk about voices on the radio or doors that closed themselves. He talked about straps and pins and the dignity of the slow lane. When he saw a truck take a curve too fast, he said, "Easy," under his breath, as if the word could push gentle air against someone's shoulder at the right moment. And when he came to a way station that was truly open, staffed, ordinary, he nodded to the person behind the glass and pulled onto the scale with the quiet hope that all numbers would be what they ought. Most nights, they were. On the nights they weren't on the nights, Something small was off by a detail invisible until seen. He felt oddly grateful to be asked to step down into the lights, to put gloves on and look. It meant the world still had rooms where careful work could be done. It meant there were still places that waited for a person at 12:7 until the lesson had landed. Story number 2. The mountain liked to keep its secrets. That was the first thing Rosa Nayar learned the year she switched from prairie lanes to the western pass from wind that pushed a rig sideways to rock that stood where it pleased and let roads run through it by permission, not by right. She liked the night runs best, when the forest drew itself up into a single dark silhouette and the air smelled of cold stone and fir. Her company sent her over the range twice a week with automotive parts wrapped in a tidy, rattling roll of crates, and she came to know each turnout, each runaway ramp, and each yellow sign warning of deer that preferred the shoulder grass to the safety of trees. On a Tuesday that had inherited rain from Monday and was turning it into fog, she climbed the grade toward the series of tunnels everyone called by numbers. 4 was short and neat. 5 had been closed for years, a casualty of a slide that pushed rock through the bore like a slow-motion tide. The state built a sweeping bypass around the scar and wrapped the old tunnel in a steel door with a row of red lamps that had not glowed in a decade. The CB was mostly quiet. A few voices traded notes about a stalled pickup back east and a coffee place that had started baking at midnight again. Rosa kept her engine brake low, the dash lights dim, and her left hand on the wheel while her right hovered over the shifter in a way that looked casual but wasn't. The digital signs leading up the incline told their usual truths. Chain up area ahead. Wildlife active. Gusts. Likely near mile marker 142. She felt settled, body and mind syncing with the engine's hum. Then a new sign lit the fog. It was one of the portable board's orange LEDs set in a panel on a trailer placed just off the right shoulder where maintenance sometimes staged for the night. Follow pilot car, it said. Single lane control through tunnel. Rosa frowned. That didn't square. The bypass handled traffic fine. Tunnel 5 was sealed. She scanned for cones, for reflective vests, for the stutter of hazard lights. The road ahead was empty. The world narrowed to the reach of her beams and their white, soft edges. Anybody catching a detour up here? She asked the CB, voice steady, casual. Westbound, 2 miles out from 4. Static answered. Then a man with a gravelly accent came through. Heard about some rock scaling tonight, he said. They sometimes pop a pilot in when they hang netting. 2 nights back, they slowed us out of nowhere past 3. You'll be fine. She nodded at no one and kept her speed honest. If there was a pilot car, she'd follow. If there wasn't, she'd assume the sign had been left to blink its way through a misunderstanding and take her usual line. A minute oozed by like syrup. The forest thickened and the grade steepened, and she settled into that patient climb a loaded truck takes when it knows its own weight. At the next turnout, a white pickup appeared from the service road like a breath fogging a cold mirror there, then clearer, then undeniable. An arrow board rose from its bed, amber chevrons sweeping left to right. In the mirror glint off its windshield, she could see no face, just the pale shapes of hard hats on the dash. The truck eased in front of her and settled in the center of the lane, an LED panel on its tailgate dictating in neat block letters. Follow me. 25 miles per hour. Copy, she said aloud, half to herself. She dropped her speed and let the gap breathe. The pilot kept her far enough back to tug at the nerves of the impatient. But Rosa wasn't impatient. She had learned long ago that time had a way of giving itself back if you bought it with a little attention. The pilot took them through Tunnel 4 short, smooth, its white tiles reflecting her beams in a way that eased and amplified them at once, and then kept on the main line. No cones, no workers, no other cars. Only fog, almost friendly, and the occasional drip from the tunnel ceiling counting its way to the floor. They crested a small rise, and the mountain showed her its trick. The white pickup signaled right and slid toward a lane Rosa had never taken before. An underpass-like duck beneath the ramping curve of the bypass. It was there in the daytime too. She'd seen the barriered entrance that fed the sealed door of Tunnel 5, but no one used it. Goldenrod posts guarded it, and a steel arm lay across it like a slumbering thing that knew its job. Tonight, the arm was up. The posts wore fresh bands of reflective tape, bright and eager. The pilot rolled through with its arrow board sweeping, and Rosa followed, all her training balanced neatly against her instinct, which had begun to whisper a question she decided not to ask yet. The concrete throat of the closed approach swallowed them. Sound changed. Road sound became room sound, tires singing in a place with its own acoustics. A set of fixed red lamps above the steel door glowed steady, and an eyebrow of moisture gathered along the frame like dew. The pilot paused. A small green indicator lit beside the red. The door shuddered, rose, and slid into the ceiling, always slower than a person expects such things to be. The air moved as if something old had sighed. The pilot's arrow set itself to a firm, unwavering straight line. Follow. Maintenance, she told herself. They'll open it when they need to, close it fast when they don't. She checked her height and width, like a ritual prayer. 13, 6, standard. The bore had been built generous. She breathed. The pilot's brake lights winked and released. She settled her truck into gear and rolled forward, her tires whispering over concrete that had not known many nights and years. Inside, the lights were not the yellow she remembered from older tunnels, but a clean, cold white, set in rows that made the distance look like a hallway in a hospital. On the radio, a voice she did not recognize, neither law enforcement nor highway maintenance, but something in between, said, "Pilot inside 5. 1 heavy behind me. Holding at 2 to 5. Watch the east wall segment near marker 9. A second voice, older, answered, "Copy. Centerline is your friend. Keep her off the seams." Rosa looked for marker 9 and found numbers stenciled in small squares along the base of the wall, crisp and new. She watched the pilot, respecting the gap. The road was as straight as a thought. And yet she had the sensation of moving through a bend, as if the mountain had found a way to make straightness feel like a choice it could revoke. Her CB hissed, and a tone she associated with weather alerts burbled up and faded. "Driver behind you good?" asked a third voice. Very near and very ordinary. It sounded like a woman about her age, wide awake, the kind of tone you use when you've been responsible for other people's safety long enough to be gentle with it. Rosa keyed the mic and said, "Good." And a burst of static rose from her own cab speaker like an answer, and then curled away. She had not given a call sign. She had not been asked. She watched the wall. At marker 9, faint chalk X's ghosted near a seam, each one drawn more than once. The lines were the kind you make with a glove on. Purposeful, not careless. Nothing about it looked wrong, and still it made the back of her neck tighten. The pilot slowed, engine tone lowering to a warm hum. Ahead, a pair of portable traffic signals stood like two minds in an argument. One held red. The other, facing the other direction, held red as well. The pilot stopped. The arrow on its board switched to a calm, beating square. Wait. In the rear view, nothing. In the mirrors, only her own trailer white against white. A little island, floating in a bright sea. Saturday, it was easy enough to encase that moment in patience. It was what she did. And yet Rosa became aware of a small, unkind trick of the light. Her trailer cast a shadow on the tunnel wall that seemed to belong to a taller load than hers. The top line wavered a little higher than a standard box, and scalloped near the rear as if a piece of equipment had been strapped there once upon a time, and told the shadow to remember it. She adjusted in the seat without meaning to. The signal clicked to green with a sound much too quiet for a thing that could dictate whether a person went or stopped. The pilot rolled. She followed. The radio crackled with a sound like wind in old branches. "Stop for hand signals only if verified with control," the older voice said, as if closing a loop in a training that some part of the mountain required them to replay every hour on the hour. As they moved, a figure appeared ahead, at first a white dot of reflection, then the shape of a vest, then a person with a baton light moving it in an obedient circle. Rosa's foot found the brake. The pilot did not slow. The baton drew a bigger circle. The person raised a palm that looked, dimly, like a stop. The pilot passed without changing its mind. Rosa set her hands. She kept rolling, heart small and careful in her chest. As she reached the spot, the person was not there. It had been an arrangement of reflection off hazard markers, a geometry read wrong by a brain that expected a human. Her laugh at that, when it came, was quiet and brief. She didn't like the sound of it in the tunnel. It seemed to bounce off places she couldn't see. They arrived at a narrowing, as if the mountain pinched the road with 2 fingers. Scaffolding hugged the left wall, a tunnel inside the tunnel, slung with tarps and plastic. A sign fixed to it, unreadable until she was almost under it, blinked in indifference to her height. Clearance 13-4. The pilot's board stayed a patient, relentless follow. Rosa eased her foot to the brake, firm and progressive, until her rig sighed into a stop. The pilot rolled ahead, as if it had no reason to recognize numbers. She thumbed the mic. "Westbound inside 5, I'm 13. 6, she said, voice steady. "I don't fit under that thing." There was a silence that felt like an office chair turned toward a window. Then the older voice returned, calm as a hand on the back of a chair. "Copy that. Hold position." The pilot's arrow blanked. Its brake lights glowed, then darkened. For a breath, it looked like a toy placed and forgotten by a child in a room. The radio clicked. A different voice recorded maybe, or just tired announced. "Detour unsuitable for standard dry vans. Use primary bore. Maintain centerline." Rosa's throat went dry. The phrase, primary bore, woke something in a pocket of memory. The plan drawings she had seen in a newspaper the year of the slide had at least 3 tunnels drawn as one, with access lanes and emergency bypasses, and a central pipe called primary. It had never opened to traffic. It was for emergencies and for maintenance. To her right, a slab of steel the color of an old coin carried the stenciled words, "Primary bore gate." Bolts ran along its edge like stitches. At the top, a small square lens glowed a patient red. Then, as if hearing someone think it, the red yielded to green. The steel shivered and began to lift in a slow, unmusical ballet. Rosa didn't move. Not yet. Her hands rested on the wheel, as if it were an animal, and she wanted to make sure it didn't decide to bolt, because she had. She measured the mouth of the opening with her eyes the way a person measures a doorway and their shoulders. The air beyond had a different color temperature, like snow-lit daylight tucked deep in a cave. She brought her foot off the brake and let the truck idle forward, the engine almost whispering. As she passed the pilot, the urge to look into its cab rose and pressed. She glanced, fast, the way you look at something you hope is ordinary. Through the windshield, the shapes on the dash made sense now. 2 hard hats, a clipboard, a coil of vest, an old contractor logo flaked on the glove box. The company had changed its name at least twice since then. The map in the passenger footwell was folded wrong, the way it gets when you love a route that doesn't love you back. The plate on the back of the truck had a registration sticker, a color she hadn't seen in years. The arrow board stayed off. It looked at peace, which shouldn't have been a word that fit anything in there and yet did. The primary bore was broad and unmarked, a road as new as a late decision. The floor carried faint tire scuffs that suggested few had used it, and those who did had done so carefully, and then not told. The walls were so clean Rosa had the irrational urge to apologize to them for bringing road dust from a weather-beaten world. Every few yards, a sign hung at chest height, "Do not stop for hand signals. Do not stop for lights not controlled by control. Do not exit vehicle." The phrase "control," capital C even when she thought it, sat oddly in the mind. The placement of the signs, the insistence of that instruction, told a story she didn't want to know the details of. At least once, someone had stopped when they shouldn't have. At least once, someone had opened a door in a place that did not like doors opened. Ahead, a light flared spring green, and then settled. Rosa's foot twitched and resumed its right place. 100 feet further, the air changed. It smelled faintly of wet concrete and of something like a hospital hallway cleaned an hour ago. She thought of the workers whose chalk marks she had seen, and of their boots tapping out shift changes down here. The radio cracked again. "Pilot," said the older voice, a little softer. "We'll hold you where you are. Driver, maintain 25. You'll see daylight soon." She wanted to say thank you and didn't, because thanks had the wrong kind of ceremony in that space. Instead, she watched the numbers on her speed hold at 25, as if they liked each other. She watched the lines on the floor, crisp and white and unscuffed, guide her like guardrails made of paint. If a figure appeared a vest, a baton light, a hand she intended to obey the signs and keep rolling short of hurting anyone. No figure came. Once, in the corner of her vision, something that could have been a human form bent over a panel against the wall, but when she turned her head, It was a cabinet door latched open and its own shadow behaving. She found daylight in a way you sometimes find sleep as a child. Suddenly, and then wondering how long it had been coming, the bore opened on a west-facing slope, where the bypass arced above like a silver ribbon. A chain-link fence separated the mouth from the world. Beyond it, opened by a remorseless sliding, a gate welcomed her through. The mountain exhaled, and the air outside brought pine back with it. The pilot did not appear. The portable sign did. On the shoulder to her right, a board told no one in particular, "Thank you for your patience." Rosa merged into a lane that had been empty long enough to look like a photograph. Behind her, the primary gate slid closed. A clean, efficient motion. In her mirror, the sealed face of Tunnel 5 looked as it had for years still. Properly asleep. A good door. Traffic picked up 3 miles later, the way a conversation resumes, after a thoughtful pause. She checked her odometer. The number had not changed the way she expected. Less distance had passed than the route usually took. Not by much, by the kind of margin a person could explain away with a slope and a long curve taken differently, but enough to make a habit notice. She touched the ELD screen with a fingertip. It logged what it logged. Time smooth as a ribbon across the mountain, speed held, nothing strange. Maybe nothing had been. She parked at a turnout where mountain people had built a diner that could feed a snowplow driver at 3 in the morning and a hiker at 3 in the afternoon. Inside, the counter felt friendly and worn. Television muted. Coffee poured by a woman with a gray braid, who had known this pass before Rosa had ever seen a hill. "Quiet tonight?" Rosa asked, as if the answer wasn't obvious from the room. "They're scaling rock," the woman said, nodding toward the television, where a bottom of the screen crawl told of delays near the summit. "The bypass has crews on it. You probably got run through 5. Rosa lifted her eyebrows the way people do when they want a story to be told to them without asking for it outright. "They don't, usually," the woman amended, refilling a mug at her elbow with a habit's accuracy. "Not for years. But when the bypass needs work, and they can't let that weight stack up, they'll run 1 or 2 through. Control handles it." "Control," Rosa repeated softly, as if trying out a word in a new language. The woman smiled. "Their word, not mine. It's the old name from when the tunnel was built. Tear-offs from the plans used to hang in here. Folks who worked on it would come in at shift change with mud on their boots and go quiet when one of the geologists came in the door, like the mountain had a rank to it. On the diner wall, a set of framed photographs showed the tunnel under construction years ago. Men in vests and hard hats stood with shovels and clipboards. A pilot car, aeroboard crooked, pointed toward the blank mouth of an unlined bore. In one photo, a white pickup sat where Rosa had seen it. Decades fresh, logo crisp, a pair of workers leaning against the bed and smiling like the job was almost done. A small brass plaque beneath it carried 2 names and 2 dates, and the phrase, "In appreciation of your watchful eyes." Rosa paid, left a tip, and stepped back into air that had reached an agreement with the fog and settled for a truce. She climbed into the cab, and when she set her hand on the seat, she felt paper. A laminated card lay where her fingers landed, slick, the size of a placard you might clip inside a hard hat. "Temporary detour protocol," it read. "Do not exceed 13.4 under scaffold. If unsuitable, use primary bore when instructed. Maintain center line. Do not stop for hand signals, not confirmed by control." It looked older than the day, stamped with an outline of a logo that had since been updated everywhere else on Earth. She turned it over. The back listed radio codes she had not heard in years. She thought of how much the mountain liked to keep its secrets, and how sometimes a secret would watch you do your job and make sure you did it carefully, and then tuck itself back into the rock. She slid the card behind her license in the wallet pocket. Not out of need, no one would ever ask to see it, but because some papers asked to be kept as a courtesy. The rest of the night unwound the way nights do across counties and markers, and the occasional line of taillights. Before the grade fell into the long valley, and the road forgot most of its curves, a maintenance truck with an aeroboard eased out of a shoulder bay ahead. The arrow swiped left to right, patient, the universal language of "take it easy, friend." Rosa eased. In her mirror, the bypass shone with a chain of work lamps, each a single star doing its little job. On the CB, light as a moth, a voice threaded through noise and said, "Escort coming east with one." Another voice answered, "See you in the pocket." Centerline. They spoke like people who had learned to trust each other by not asking too many questions at once. Rosa smiled, and without touching the wheel, straightened by a fraction of a breath. Weeks later, news came down that Tunnel 5 would be rehabbed. A grant had shown up, the mountain had agreed to the work, and the drawings on the wall at the diner acquired a cousin. Bright new schematics with orange notes in the margins, and a start date tucked into the corner. Rosa saw the photocopy under glass on a Tuesday, the same kind of Tuesday that had first brought her there with fog and an aero board, and she stood for a moment longer than she needed, as if reading a stranger's handwriting that reminded her of someone she loved. She didn't tell anyone about the pilot car, that seemed to know unshared things. She did not tell anyone about the chalk X's, that looked fresh in a place no chalk should have survived. She told herself that the world had more systems than people realized, and some of them were kind as well as particular. That night, when the road bent against the mountain and asked for her respect again, she gave it. She slid down a gear in a way the engine liked. She took the center line when the signs suggested she should. She watched for hand signals and listened to the radio. Somewhere in her head, the laminated card whispered polite reminders she would not forget. And somewhere under the mountain, in a tunnel that slept and woke as the work required, a pilot car waited in a pocket of quiet with its board down, not needing to hurry. And if a person a mile behind her or a mile ahead asked the CB whether detours were live tonight, a voice would become present enough to answer, and the mountain would keep exactly as many of its secrets as it chose to, and not one more. Story number 3. People forget the blue phones until they need them. They dot old highways like beads on a string, standing back from the shoulder with their little lamps and their patient instructions, meant for the days when a signal didn't sit in every pocket. Eli Mercer had been running the Sierra Blanca cutoff longer than most folks had been driving, and he'd watched those phones go from brand new to ignored, to the kind of relic the state kept because taking them out would cost more than letting them watch the night. He liked the cutoff because it was honest. Miles of desert, low scrub, a wind that smelled of creosote if there had been rain, and of sun-warmed dust if there hadn't. He ran it when the interstate was doing its usual dance with construction, when detours pushed cars into silly lines, when the county fair in the valley lit everything with a noise he didn't need at that hour. His route tonight carried pallets of dry goods, the kind of freight that rode quiet and didn't ask questions, bound for a chain of markets that wanted to open with full shelves. Close to 1 a.m, the sky wore a thin layer of cloud that glowed like old porcelain. The road ahead spat back only what his headlights fed it. On the CB, a soft check-in from a driver he knew by voice, and then nothing. His dash glowed in a way that made him think of aquariums. He saw the first blue phone lit from a mile away, a small coin of light held above the camisa. The sign beneath it read, "Emergency Call Box," in reflective letters that had weathered without giving up. "Still there," he said under his breath. Not surprised. Not anything. The wind ran along the side of his trailer with a steady, almost affable hush. Then the phone rang. It was a sound he hadn't heard on that stretch in a long time. The clean, mechanical bell of an old line, 2 short peals. A breath of silence. 2 short peals again. It carried. He glanced at the empty mirror, and then at the shoulder where sand had drifted into dunes as gentle as spun sugar. He kept rolling. People played with the boxes sometimes. He'd read a notice once about a maintenance test where techs called through the network in the middle of the night to make sure the wires remembered how to do their work. He passed the box. The ringing cut off as if someone had lifted a receiver. The lamp above it flickered, held steady, and then went still. He looked ahead. Another blue dot waited, and when he came within the same distance, its phone rang too. Same pattern. 2 and 2. He set his jaw and drove. Patience sitting across from caution, like 2 people having coffee and deciding whether to stand. The cutoff's mile markers ticked past. He counted them out of habit, not out of need. 252. 251. The boxes had their own numbers, small decals set on the posts waist high, the digits printed black on white. Box 52. Box 51. The second one went silent as he passed, and the wind came back up, a sound like a soft coat being shaken out. It would have been simple to say a technician was walking ahead of him, ringing each in sequence. But there was nowhere to walk from box to box through that stretch, without stepping into brush laced with wire fence and gopher holes. And besides, the desert liked its illusions, but it didn't tend to stage shows for one person driving politely with empty lanes for company. "Anyone hear those phones going off?" he asked the CB, expecting nothing. A voice from farther east replied, crackly but friendly. "You on the cutoff, Eli? They do tests. Keep her steady." He smiled despite himself at being identified by the way he sounded when he wasn't saying much. "Copy. Keeping her steady." At box 49, the phone rang hard enough that the sound pressed through the sealed cab. He turned down the radio, not out of concern but because the mind likes to triage noises and needed to decide this one's place among the others. 2 bells. Pause. 2 bells. Pause. When the sound stopped, the silence laid itself down in a way he felt behind the sternum. Ahead, a turnout appeared, marked by an old picnic sign and a wooden fence that had weathered into an honest gray. It had a tiny interpretive plaque about the telegraph line that used to run the route a century ago, back when a wire stretched between posts the way a road stretched between towns. He told himself he would not stop. The engine and the freight were content. But the ring from box 48 started before he had even reached the turnout, and he found his hands signaling, easing, making the good decision to check his tires, check a strap, breathe. He coasted in, hazard lights off, idled in a pocket of darkness that felt like a shy room. The phone at box 48 rang into the space around him like a clean insistence. He set the brake and stepped down. The desert's night air was cool, a kindness. The call box sat 20 steps back from the pavement, on a concrete pad painted with a number no one would see unless they were on foot. The lamp above it hummed, bright enough to tell the lizards a new star had arrived. The door on the box carried simple instructions. Lift receiver, wait for operator, report mile and direction. He lifted. The handset felt heavier than it looked. He expected dead air. He expected the rough hiss of a line left on. "Roadside," said a voice, composed and entirely present, the sound of a person who had made their job a quiet art. "State location, and whether you are in a safe position." Eli's mouth was dry, and he didn't know why. "Cut off, westbound," he said. "Between 250, 2 and 250 by my count. Pulled off at the picnic fence. No hazard, just..." He looked back at the truck. The red glow of his brake lights gave it an ember's dignity. "Thank you," the operator said. "Remain in your vehicle. We're moving you through a controlled sequence. Do you see triangles deployed behind your rear axles?" He frowned, turned, and blinked. A set of 3 old-style metal reflectors sat in the lane behind his trailer, set correctly, spaced as if a hand had measured the distances on an afternoon long enough to teach them. He had not put them there. They were not his. "No," he said, and then corrected himself because accuracy mattered with voices like this. "I do now, but I didn't set them. They're older. Red paint. Metal legs. Copy," the operator said, as if what he'd reported made a kind of sense in whichever room she occupied. "Do not collect them. Leave them for now. You'll see blue box lamps activating in sequence. Maintain your lane. Do not stop for any signals not originated by this box or the one at 0. If you hear a 3-tone transfer, cover your mirrors until it ends and continue. Do you understand?" He did not fully, but he understood enough to put confusion in line behind compliance. "I understand. Proceed when ready," the operator said. The phone did not click when she was gone. It eased out from his ear like a tide going slack, and he hung the receiver on its hook with a care he would not have shown a kitchen handset at home. He returned to the cab. The triangles glinted like eyes and stayed where they were until he rolled, at which point he saw them not in the mirrors where they should have receded, but ahead, 3 neat dots placed along the shoulder just beyond the next box, as if time had folded them from behind him to before him. He kept his foot even on the accelerator, and the engine replied with its gentle, serious hum. Box 47 rang. 2. 2. He didn't stop. Box 46 lit, did not ring, and then lit again, like a blink. The numbers on their pedestals counted down as if the road had decided that was the right story to tell tonight. The mile markers on the right counted down in sync until one did not, a 4 wearing the paint of a 6, and he found himself breathing slower because the mind likes things that match, and the world does not always grant them. At box 45, a figure stood in the wash of light, and for the part of a second it took the brain to throw shapes into categories. Eli saw a man in a work vest raising a palm. The next part of a second replaced that man with a tarp folded over a cattle fence, the reflective strip catching the lamp's glow, the wind persuading it to lift like a greeting. He smiled again, a private smile people wear when reminded they are, after all, still animals with eyes. He reached for the CB out of habit. "Boxes are live out here," he said. Another driver answered with a yawn tucked into a word. "Those old things? Thought they were dead." Eli was about to agree when Box 44's lamp chandeliered into white. The phone inside rang with a slightly different pitch than the others, like a bell whose striker had worn a groove in its favorite place. The ELD screen rolled along as if nothing in the world had changed. His speed settled at 52 without him willing it, the needle finding that number and using it like a lane of its own. Off to the south, low hills shouldered up and fell away. Somewhere out there, a coyote decided not to sing. The sky held its porcelain. At Box 43, the ground near the post looked darker, a patch of shade where no shade should have been. As he approached, the dark resolved itself into footprints, many of them, boot treads overlapping on the packed sand in a way that suggested a group had waited there long enough to shift their weight from foot to foot and back again. The prints continued 5 steps and then did not, as if the sand had gone too tired to hold shapes, or as if whoever made them had chosen the shoulder of the air instead of the shoulder of the road. He did not slow. The instruction on the door of the first box had not asked him to investigate. It had asked him to go forward. He thought then of a memory that hadn't occurred to him in years. A dispatcher telling a story about a power outage along this stretch in the early 2000s, how the call boxes had kept working on their own battery lines and solar, how they'd lit up at dusk like a string of cautious stars, how people had pulled in not to call anyone but to stand in their small blue islands and wait for the wildness of the night to wear itself out. It wasn't strange to want a light to tell you to try again tomorrow. Box 42 lit, and the bell tone played not twice but 3 times at quick intervals, a triplet that lifted the hair on his forearms despite the cab's mild warmth. He remembered the operator's words, 3-tone transfer, cover your mirrors, and did a thing that felt foolish until it didn't. He tapped the switch that swung his mirrors inward in their powered housings, cutting off the view of the road behind. He looked ahead. Only ahead. Something skimmed along the edge of his imagination then. The suggestion of a vehicle in his lane half a mile back that matched his shape, matched his taillight spacing, matched the way he favored the right tire track, about to catch him, and not catch him, present and not present at once. He let the thought pass like a small gust, and when the bell tone ended, and the lamps resumed their businesslike glows, he tapped the mirrors back out and found only desert, patient, and unremarkable. When he reached Box 40, the operator's voice returned without him lifting a receiver. It came from the box's speaker, the audio thin with distance but undecorated by drama. "You're doing fine, westbound," she said. "Stay with the sequence. 0 is at the overpass hollow. The gate will be open. Do not break in the tunnel. Hold steady." He couldn't help it. He smiled at her steadiness, the way a person smiles when a teacher makes math feel like a story. "Copy," he said aloud, not to the radio, not to anything that could send his acknowledgement back. It made no difference. The box did not ask for proof. A sign he had never noticed appeared, a small aluminum panel on a post with a graphic of a phone and an arrow pointing straight ahead, 1 mile. The triangle of reflectors repeated at the road edge like a punctuation mark. He watched them and thought of the way languages put little marks in the margins to tell readers where to pause and where to keep going despite the urge to stop. He crested a shallow rise. The land opened like a breath. Ahead, the old overpass hollowed itself under a newer road. The concrete throat a little like the mountain tunnel he'd driven months back, but built by a different temperament. On the right, a maintenance gate sat offset from the lane. Chain link rolled back, wheel stops clean. A blue lamp burned above a door inset into the underpass wall, and a call box, unlabeled where all the others had numbered themselves, rang not at all. Its lamp held steady. Its door bore one line, "Proceed to light." He did. He did not have to wonder what the light was. It waited inside the short underpass, a rectangular window of pale that was neither daylight nor headlight, a fixed panel of something that told light to be light and nothing else. As he passed under, his radio clicked with a tiny sound like a fingernail on a countertop. The operator's voice returned, softer, as if standing a step farther from her own microphone. "Thank you. You did it right," she said. "Resume normal travel." The underpass whooshed. The tires found the other side of its echo. He rolled on. He checked a mirror and saw, for the smallest acceptable moment, the hint of his own taillights doubling as if a twin had bowed from view. And then the glass gave him what a person expects from mirrors. The world, indifferently accurate. Behind him, the blue lamps did not ring. Saturday, he waited for box 39 to clamor. For box 38 to take a turn, but the desert had decided that was enough theater. He found the interstate merge without looking for it, and took it because his route had always included it, and because the state had painted arrows on the concrete inviting him. He slid into the stream of 2 other trucks and a single car traveling with the caution of a person who had accidentally stayed up until dawn and remembered to value their life. He stopped for fuel at the kind of station that solves problems for a living. Under the canopy, he swiped, clicked, and listened to the steady rush that meant his day would continue to be a day, and not a question. Another driver on the other side of the pump bay caught his eye, and they traded nods the way people do in the night who feel no need to explain themselves. "You take the cutoff tonight?" the other driver asked, not unkindly, just making the kind of talk that keeps a person attached to the world. "I did," Eli said, wiping his hands. Phones were lit. The driver, a woman with a cap from a county softball team and a coffee that had clearly been poured out of a promise, snorted. "They do that sometimes when the wind is right," she said. "My granddad worked for the district. Said those phones still have their own brains down there. Said the desert didn't like to waste a thing that works." Eli nodded. He wasn't prone to believing or disbelieving. He was prone to doing the job and respecting the quiet that came from doing it right. He wanted to ask whether her granddad had left behind a shelf of stories about nights like this one, but he knew better than to go digging at the feet of a tale that had already stood up politely and walked away. In the convenience store, a corkboard held flyers, lost dogs, bake sales, a car for sale that had a lot of highway miles left to give. Tucked among them, a yellowing memo, pinned by accident or on purpose, carried a header from the Roadside Communications Division. Decommission schedule, it read. Dated half a decade back. Boxes 60 through 45 removed. Boxes 44 through 0 maintained until further notice. A note in ink at the bottom said, in a hand that had stood up to time, "Keep 0 live." He didn't take a picture. He didn't have to. He could count without counting, and remember without a phone helping him. He left with a bottle of water and the feeling people get when someone has quietly opened a door for them and asked nothing in return. When he climbed back into the cab, there was a small coiled zip tie on his seat, the kind used to lock a box closed after service, bright and unmarked, like it had just been pulled from a bag. He turned it in his fingers, then placed it in the pocket beside his registration. It felt less like a souvenir and more like a reminder, a little circle telling him that circles can end where they should. He made the delivery as the eastern edge of the world decided to become a color again. The warehouse lights took over from the stars with the professionalism of stagehands. Pallets came off and slid into somebody else's responsibility. Eli signed. Polite and brief. The clerk did their job with the clarity of someone who had never stood by a blue phone and listened for a voice that wanted nothing more than for him to keep doing exactly what he was already doing. On the return run, late enough to count as early, he took the cutoff again because habits that have earned their place tend to get to stay. The phones did not ring. The lamps did not show him their patience. The wind used the shoulder to say the things wind says when it knows only tires and brush and a bird that decides to cross at the last second and then doesn't. He looked at box 48 when he passed it, because he would have been a different kind of fool if he hadn't. It stood quietly on its pad, lamp off. The triangles weren't anywhere, neither behind him nor ahead. The interpretive plaque at the turnout said only what it had said yesterday and would say next year. Still, when a dust devil took shape out in a field and danced along a fence line and then wandered off, he felt the same kind of relief he'd felt at the underpass when a voice said, "Thank you." It wasn't gratitude to anyone in particular. It was more the feeling a person gets on a night road when a small rule meets a big idea and everything agrees to behave. It takes so little to keep it that way, he thought. A steady speed. A hand on the wheel. An ear that knows when to listen and when to reduce the radio to a suggestion. He would tell no one about the three-tone transfer or the instruction to use mirrors like eyelids because it sounded like superstition when spoken aloud. He would, however, do something quiet. The next time he saw a box standing in a heat haze at noon, he would glance to make sure its door had latched. And the next time he passed the underpass, he would check for a blue lamp and a gate rolled back. He would keep an eye on mile markers and let them tell the story they wanted to tell on their schedule, not his. And if a voice ever wove itself into the sound of wind and wires and asked him to repeat his position, he would oblige with the patience of a person who knows the desert, remembers everything, and uses what it remembers kindly. Story number 4. Daryl Finn preferred crossing state lines at night. The big green signs went from declarative to gentle after midnight, and the worries that came with daylight construction, tourist merges, the sudden whims of weather apps flattened into a lane he could keep. He was rolling south with a reefer full of berries, humming a steady, satisfied tone, the kind of load that wanted quiet and repaid patience with perfect arrival times. After hours of pine and long black stretches, the sign he'd been half expecting eased up along the right shoulder. State Line Welcome Center trucks. Okay, 24 hours. He didn't need it. He still had coffee and miles left, but the thought of a quick walk and a cold drink from a machine sounded good in a way that makes a driver's hands choose a turn signal without asking anyone's permission. He eased off, letting the exit's curve carry him like a slow breath. The off-ramp lifted over scrub and dipped into a pocket of lights. The lot spread wide and unhurried, lanes striped with a careful hand, a row of truck spaces set back from the roadway, as if the planners wanted rigs to feel like guests. Sodium lamps threw their particular honey glow over concrete, and a bank of evergreens made a windbreak that sounded like the sea. He backed into a spot by reflex, wheels kissing the curb perfectly. He set the brake, checked his mirrors, and listened to the reefer's hymn settle into the night's larger quiet. From here he could see the Welcome Center building, brick, low, a roofline like a hand holding a map flat. The front walk led across a tidy grass triangle to glass doors. Above them, backlit in a way that made the words float in their own pale sky, was a slogan. Our roads, your journey. A flag moved softly on its pole. Somewhere near the trees, a ground light clicked on and then off, testing itself. He left the engine idling to keep the box in its good mood, and stepped down with the easy creak of a cab that knew him. The air smelled of damp bark. The highway hissed faintly a hill away. The noise of speed at a distance is always polite. A moth did a circuit between two lamps, patient as a slow thought. Inside, the Welcome Center felt like a museum the state hadn't had time to fully admit was a museum. A big floor mosaic showed the outline of the state in blue tile, highways traced in cream, tiny red triangles, stitched where rest areas lived. A rotating brochure rack whispered to itself. A wall-length photograph of a canyon warmed in warm tones under a light that wasn't quite the color of daylight. The vending machines glowed like little cities. Restrooms to the left, said a recorded voice from overhead, cheerful without being chirpy. Information desk to the right. Please watch your step. He glanced at the information desk. A bell sat on it. A plastic stand held a name tag that read, Volunteer Marion, in cheerful serif letters. No one sat in the chair. Behind the desk, a corkboard lined with pins held snapshots of smiling families at roadside overlooks. One of the photos was of a driver in a faded cap, standing by a chrome grill, his arm around a kid holding an ice cream cone. The caption sticker read, Road Team 1000, 998 Tour. Daryl went to the machine and studied the options. Names he knew. One or two he hadn't seen in a while. A cola that used to sponsor ballparks, a lemon, lime with a bold stripe down the can like it was means business. He pressed C4 for water. The machine thought for a moment, then dropped a bottle. When he reached into the bay, the plastic felt colder than it should have, the kind of deep chill a drink gets when it sits by a walk-in freezer door that doesn't seal right. He turned the bottle in his hand. The label's fine print facility address, bottling date, gave him a pause he couldn't name. The year stamped along the edge was the right format but wrong somehow, as if the printer had tried to be helpful and chosen last year by accident. He looked again. It was fine. He told his brain to take a seat. He unscrewed the cap and took a long drink that made his chest feel like a hallway had been opened in it. A door at the far end of the lobby stood open part way, the kind of wedge that invites without insisting. A sign near it announced, Exhibit Hall, the making of our highways. Curiosity turned his feet in that direction, because if there's one consistent thing about drivers, It's that they like to know how things are put together. The hall beyond was bright without being loud. A timeline walked along one wall with construction photos, men in hats out of fashion now, scaffolding, old concrete, new bridges arranged like a careful confession. A map under plexiglass showed donor names for roadside plantings. Families, clubs, a trucking company he recognized that had been bought out years ago. In a corner, under a soft pool of light, stood a detailed scale model of the interchange he had just left. Ramps looping like ribbon candy. The welcome center perched in miniature with a tiny, perfect flag. He leaned over it and looked for the things model makers sometimes snuck in tiny children, a dog in a backyard, a joke in the form of a billboard. He found instead a parking lot with 3 painted little rigs on the far right row, colored red, white, and blue in tidy gloss. In the real lot outside, his truck sat second from the end. He looked back at the model. The middle one was white. Behind him, the overhead voice returned. Different words, same tone. A reminder. The Welcome Center is open to travelers 24 hours. Volunteers are available from 8 to 5. There was a click after the announcement, like a tape ending and a machine deciding it had done its duty. Near the model, a wooden bench held a stack of free maps. He took one and unfolded it. The paper was crisp, the edges clean. A small note on the bottom margin said, "Printed courtesy of the Highway Friends." The logo beside the words was a design he knew from his earliest runs before they simplified it, before the font lost its curl. He slipped the map into his jacket pocket, the way a person pockets a leaf because it had the decency to fall in front of them. He used the restroom because that was what he had come to do, really. The tile was clean, the hum of the ventilation a note his ear forgot in seconds. He washed his hands and caught his reflection in the mirror with the quick surprise everyone does in unfamiliar lights. For just that fraction of a beat, his mind read the man in the glass as someone else. Their posture matched his. Their cap didn't. He blinked, and the mirror behaved like a mirror against him. Tired enough to be honest, eyes clear. The look of someone who had done this tonight and would do it tomorrow, and didn't resent that truth. On his way back through the lobby, the bell on the desk gave a small tremble on its own, the way a thing quivers when someone has just brushed by it. Air moved. The brochure rack turned a fraction. Postcards for scenic overlooks, showing a lake nobody would call by its official name if they grew up near it. The recorded voice said, "Please have your questions ready. The volunteer may be assisting other travelers." He set his bottle down on the desk for a moment and folded the map open, tracing his route to the next city with a forefinger. The route was there like it had always been, but a handwritten note in neat block letters had been added at the edge. Slow wind on River Bridge midnight to 2 low visibility advisories. The ink looked like blue ballpoint. He checked his watch. 1:07. He hadn't listened to his phone's alerts in the last hour. He'd been letting the world's quiet do its work. He touched the phone screen. No notifications. He made a little sound that meant the same thing as a nod. A door behind the information desk clicked. It might have been pipes. It might have been old HVAC negotiating with new parts. He gathered his bottle and thanked no one out loud because sometimes that's more for a person than for people, and walked out into the night. The lot was exactly as he had left it. Evergreens? Whispered. Lamps kept their easy watch. Down at the end of the row, the truck that had been parked 2 spaces over dark blue with silver striping looked like it had just turned its lights off. The warmth of a cooling hood makes a shape different even if you can't see the color. He climbed into his cab and settled. The reefer's readout stayed steady. The dash clock ticked to 19. He turned the key toward the engine and paused, listening to a different sound, the low murmur of voices on his CB. "River bridges running fog banks," said a woman's voice with a practical kindness in it. "Use markers, no sudden inputs." "Copy," Amen replied. "Southbound's clean?" "For now." It wasn't unusual to catch locals on 19 speaking like that. What did nudge Daryl's thinking was that his CB had been off. He reached for the switch. It lay exactly where he left it off. He flicked it on and listened to the expected hiss. Silence. He flicked it off again. Their words remained, fading like the end of a song when someone turns a knob. The lot, patient, went about being a lot. The highway took him back easily. He slipped through the on-ramp curve, felt the main line's wider shoulders gather under his tires, and let the rig find the speed he trusted. In the distance, The small furled flag of the overhead sign for the river bridge came into view. It read, "O. Area ahead. Use low beam." He could almost feel the way his hands grew more careful on the wheel as he read it. Habit is a friend drivers don't expect to have until they notice it. Fog hugged the bridge like a shy guest. It wasn't the worst he'd seen. It was the kind you meet with procedure. He watched for the cat's eyes, those tiny prismatic reflectors, set along the center line winking in pairs beneath his beams. And he watched the right-hand marker posts appear, and then conclude, each a little metronome tap. The world beyond the railing didn't exist and didn't need to for now. He thought of the handwritten map note and felt both stupid and grateful in equal amounts. Halfway across, a small amber light glowed low on the right shoulder, the kind mounted on temporary barrels during day jobs. It blinked twice and paused. Blinked twice and paused. He had seen that pattern earlier, but not on a bridge. It pulled up from memory calm as a bubble, the blink of the vending machine when it thought too long about a selection before agreeing. It was funny what the mind noticed when given a chance. On the far side of the bridge, the fog let go all at once, like a breath being returned. The lanes widened visually. The signs, the rational, reflective kind that are you a promise when they say what they say, returned to easy duty. He drove, felt his shoulders loosen a notch, and let the reefer's steady sound carry him a little like a song under a scene. The next town glowed ahead. He considered stopping at a travel plaza he liked for a better coffee than the one his thermos kept. He passed it with a small wave of thought at the building, because the load wanted to ride, and he was happy to keep it company. He told himself he would call the Welcome Center in the morning, and thank whoever had left the map notes, and ask how to donate to their highway friends. He liked the idea of his name small, in a list somewhere near a rosebush planted along a ramp. 2 nights later, the same route brought him the same sign. State Line Welcome Center trucks. Okay, 24 hours. He hadn't planned to stop. He felt rested enough, and the thermos had done its job, but he slowed anyway because curiosity is a decent teacher. The lot lay in its careful arrangement. He parked in the same row without trying to. He walked toward the glass doors and found them locked. The lights were on. The lobby was lit the exact same way. The model sat in its pool of soft. The brochure rack dozed. On the information desk, the bell reflected a small circle of light onto the ceiling, the kind of thing you could see only if you were on the outside looking in. A sign taped to the glass near the handle read, in clear, polite letters, "Closed for maintenance, 10 p.m., 6 amperes. M, thank you." In the corner of the paper, the same logo as the map, with the older font, smiled like a history book. He stepped back and looked through the pane at the timeline. He could make out the road team 1998 tour photograph and the cap the driver wore. It was his model of cap, all right, but so were half the caps in the world. That meant nothing. The recorded voice spoke anyway, audible through the glass just enough to catch words. "Please watch your step," it said, to an empty room that didn't mind hearing itself. Inside, a motion sensor light clicked off in a far corridor, and darkness tucked a corner under itself. He walked back to his truck and sat for a minute without turning the key. The reefer kept faith. A breeze moved the evergreen tops in a long ripple. Somewhere in the trees, a bird that didn't care about people made its small nightly statement and then took it back. He thought about the bell he hadn't rung and the map he had pocketed, and the bridge he might have met differently without the suggestion to meet it gently. In the morning, in daylight, with the state having decided to color itself in, he came through northbound empty and glanced down at the Welcome Center from the crown of the ramp. Maintenance trucks sat in the front lot at angles that said they had been told to stand guard. A stack of traffic cones leaned against the curb like an orange bouquet. Workers in vests moved in and out, and on the lawn, a white sign with a decal instructed, "Volunteers, please check in at rear." The week turned. Loads came and went. He took a different run out west, and crossed a different state line with a different welcome. The nights did their slow work on him, the way they do on people paying attention. On a drizzly Tuesday, he didn't need to stop but wanted to. He pulled off again. The lot held a handful of rigs, all settled like stones in a pond. The building's doors stood propped open for the first time in days. Inside, a new poster behind the desk announced an upcoming event. Road Stories Share Your Best Drive, with dates printed and a line for signatures. 2 names had already signed in block letters. Under them, someone had written, in neat cursive, Marion. Daryl pressed the bell. Its sound had the kind of ring letters on a page can't carry. No one came. He didn't wait. He drank water and walked the exhibit hall and, out of respect for whatever made the notes appear where they helped, took out a pen and crouched by the map model carefully, because boundaries mattered, and drew a tiny dot with an even tinier line on the plexiglass where the fog had been worst on the river bridge the other night. He wiped it off with his sleeve before it could become a vandalism, and counted that thought as enough. He left with a new map because he had a thing for maps. And out on the highway, a temporary message board announced in sharp pixels, River Bridge visibility low. 1.3 amperes. Use caution. The sign hadn't been there the week before. It would have been there anyway, sign crews doing their work without help from welcome centers or men in caps. He smiled because it all fit together regardless. On a shelf above his logbook, the map he'd taken that first night slid a little out of its folded confidence as the truck hit a long joint. It showed him a blue line for a river, a cream curve for a road, and a note in ballpoint that had the good manners to be vague. If anyone asked him later about the welcome center at that line, he would tell them it was open late sometimes and closed early sometimes, and always worth a stop if the night felt like it wanted a room that understood roads. He would leave out the part about the CB speaking into an off switch, and the vending machine pretending to think. Those were his to hold. He crossed the bridge again in fog that wasn't trying to impress anybody, and let the centerline markers tick through like a quiet metronome. On the radio, a voice he recognized and didn't play it in, soft with static. Ease through, driver. He did. Not because a voice had told him to, but because easing through was smart. Sometimes the unsettling part of a night wasn't the voices you heard, but how they knew the timing of your life without being introduced. He could live with that. He had. For years. He would for a few more. Story number 5. Malik Rowe trusted his gauges. The modern truck gave him a dozen more ways to measure a night than the rigs he'd learned on, and he liked the thought that numbers could walk alongside instinct without stepping on its heels. He kept his dash simple, the ELD dimmed to a soft night mode. The forward camera showing a quiet stream of road ahead. The lane keep nudges set gentle. He was hauling frozen bread toward a coastal distribution center, a route that took him off the interstate for 40 miles and over the Sable Marsh Causeway, where the world turned to watergrass and black sheen on both sides, and the air smelled like cold leaves. Around one, a low fog drifted up from the marsh, the kind that replaces distance with texture. The causeway offered one lane each way and a narrow shoulder with steel cable running its length. The old timber guardrails had been retired years ago, but the new lines looked fresh and sure under his headlights. Signs warned. Gusts. Wildlife. Soft shoulder. His radio was quiet. The reefer hummed like a contented hive behind him, and the cab held the smell of coffee that had already done its work. A small green sign at the approach named the crossing and added a bit of civic poetry. Sable Marsh Causeway. Respect the water. He did. He eased down a gear to settle the engine at a tone that felt like concentration. The fog lifted and dropped in rags. Reflectors along the center line blinked back his presence, little winks that made a path feel more human than it was. 50 yards onto the causeway, the forward collision alert chimed twice polite, not insistent, while a white bracket on the dashcam overlay painted a square where no object Saturday pedestrian, the system suggested in a sober font. Malik leaned forward without meaning to, eyes soft for depth. The road stretched clean, a ribbon of light into quiet. He rolled out of the alert without tapping the brakes. The bracket faded. He breathed. Another 100 yards, another chime. This time the box skewed right, hugging the edge of the shoulder where cattails rose taller than the hood. He muttered to the cabin air, "All right, friend." The way a person speaks to a machine when it's trying a little too hard. The marsh lay flat and complicated under the fog, every tuft of reed a proposal for a shape the camera might like. He thumbed the sensitivity down one notch and kept to 50. Past the mile 14 marker, a cluster of reflectors to the right coalesced into something more. Silk ribbons stirred in the breeze, taped to a small wooden cross planted in the grass. The bouquets had weathered, colors gone private. Malik knew the kind of place where people left such things. He did not stare. The alert chimed, put a bracket around air astride off the cross, and then went modest again. The CB came alive with a voice that grew out of static like a photograph in a tray. "Evening on the Sable," said a man, neither young nor old, voice calm, the way local volunteers sound when they've said the same useful sentence in many storms. "Fog pockets near 14. Center your lane. Don't ride the cable." Malik didn't reach for the mic. He hadn't keyed up in an hour. He let the words wash over him and do what they were built to do. He cut a glance at the dash clock. 1:11. The only other lights were almond-colored dots far across the water, porch lamps on houses he'd never find while the world slept. Another chime. The dash painted a new bracket 20 feet ahead. Dead center. The label changed. Unknown object. He eased his foot. Not much. Just enough to let his rig feel his patience. A breeze moved through the reeds. The bracket tracked a fraction and faded. Whatever the sensor saw had slipped back into being the night. Half the causeway was a straight grace. The middle offered a subtle bend to let boats pass where the channel deepened. The old drawbridge house, no longer a working thing, just a polite square of history, stood out there on its pilings. He saw the blacker rectangle where it met the water, and the flood lamp mounted under its roofline that had long since given up. The alert went from polite to serious, 3 short beeps. A sharp tone, the dash overlay turning the bracket amber. "Brake," the system asked. Not loudly, but with conviction. Malik's foot moved before the sound finished, as if the two were parts of the same action. The rig's brakes laid a steady hand on 38,000 pounds. Nothing leapt from the fog. Nothing crossed the beams. He let the deceleration become distance, then feathered off, eyes cutting the edges for a reason. The reason arrived late and small, and would have been unremarkable in daylight. A slick of water had washed onto the lane from the right, a sheet as thin and misleading as glass. Beyond it, a section of shoulder had slumped down a hand's breadth where the marsh had argued successfully with the roadbed. The cable hung at a new angle, a subtle change only a person whose work involved lines would read as a message. He rolled through the slick like it was ice, straight and unadorned, and felt the rig step once and recover. He exhaled, slow. The fog carried the breath away without comment. "Good catch," the voice from the CB said. Not to him, to anyone. "Wash out at midspan. Count'll be out after daybreak. Hold center." Malik reached and turned the CB's volume up 2 clicks, as if to meet the voice halfway. He didn't answer. The voice had not asked a question. The dash settled down. The lane keep gave him one soft nudge when his right tires flirted with the line upon a gust. He corrected and murmured, thanks to no one in particular. The marsh made its small night noises, dry reeds clicking, water quiet. He watched where the cat's eyes winked and where they didn't. A quarter-mile later, the forward camera bracket appeared again, small and low and moving in a way that made his scalp feel strange. It was as if a person were walking the shoulder ahead of him, pace steady, just inside his range and always inside his range, 2 never growing, never diminishing. The label said unknown object again, a phrase that sounded both modest and proud, as if the machine had graduated and kept humility. The bracket drifted toward the center line and then back to the shoulder, as if it was pacing a fence. He told himself it was fog pooling in a shape the camera liked. He told himself it was nothing. He slowed 2 miles an hour because the body sometimes chooses before the mind votes. The bracket persisted another 30 seconds, then sidestepped right as neatly as a person might if they were making room for a truck, and disappeared. The dash returning to the comfort of its quiet black. A convenience turnout appeared on the left, 1 car length of concrete that had been poured devoutly and then mostly ignored. Malik didn't pull in. He didn't want to take his tires off a steady line. He imagined instead the heavy little anchor of a tripod set there once upon a time, someone with a measuring rod and a clipboard in an orange vest, writing numbers on a form as old as the form of writing numbers at roads. His phone buzzed once in its mount, a notification from the navigation app he kept in the background as a courtesy to dispatch. Advisory ahead. Water on roadway, at Sable Marsh Causeway. Reported 7 amperes. He glanced at the time the way a person looks at a runway out a plane window long after leaving the airport. "Thank you," he said, because the night had made a habit of asking nothing in return for small favors. At mile 13.6, the alert tone changed. Not a beep, a chime. 3 notes, rising. The dash didn't show a bracket. The lane, keep lines, went soft, as if the system had blinked. He recognized the pattern from the manual tucked somewhere under the driver's seat: temporary sensor occlusion, cover mirrors if needed during a transfer. It made him want to smile at the idea that even machines have their rituals for complex places. He tapped the button that folded his mirrors inward for a count of 4, then eased them back. The fog brightened for a second, the way it does when some angle of light meets it and changes its mind about being invisible. When the mirrors rejoined the night, a gentle line of low reflectors he hadn't noticed earlier showed the curve ahead in an extra row, as if a maintenance crew had laid a belt of light along the edge for nights exactly like this one. He filed that away under kindnesses. Near the far end, where cattails ceded to scrub and the causeway rose onto the mainland, the dashcam bracket drew a neat square on the left lane, 200 feet ahead, and labeled it debris. He saw nothing. He would have sworn there was nothing. He eased left tires a foot right of his usual track anyway, because why not err in the direction of courtesy? When he reached the spot, something small clicked against his right front tire and spun off a strip of thin siding peeled by weather and thrown back to the world. It wouldn't have done more than make a noise. Still, the bracket had told him a story he believed just enough to pass the test. The causeway ended without drama. Trees gathered into their familiar tunnel. The road widened in his head, even if it didn't widen on the ground. He set the cruise 2 notches higher, both hands at an easy 2:45, and let the truck carry on. At the next pull-off, where local fishermen parked their pickups in the morning, he saw a sedan sitting with its hazard lights politely blinking. Hood cool. Nobody inside. A paper plate on the dash said "back in 10" in a careful hand. He could have stopped. He didn't. The sedan belonged to a world that didn't need him if it had the patience to leave notes for itself. He traded the causeway for town road and town road for a bypass, and the bypass for the freeway again. At the first large travel center past the marsh, he treated himself to a refill of coffee, the way a person nods to themselves after having done something quietly well. He set the cup beside the dash and appreciated the familiar constellation of trucks on every side, engines idling and keys he could hum. Inside, near a rack of bungee cords and maps, 2 drivers stood in conversation. He caught the tail of their talk the way a person catches a wind change. "You see the washout?" one asked. "Midspan," the other replied, hooking a thumb toward the direction of the marsh. "Came up quick last week with that tide and the wind. County's got crews staged. Sensors catch what people don't." "Which sensors?" the first driver asked, amused and skeptical in equal measure. "All of them," said the second with a smile. "Phones. Trucks. Folks. There's a guy runs the volunteer channel who lives out there and calls in fog changes like he's announcing the weather for a ball game. Malik bought a protein bar he didn't particularly want and took it back to the cab for later." He sat with the coffee and watched the dashcam screen in replay. The brackets reappeared exactly where he remembered them, squares around nothing, polite accusations without a witness. The brake event drew a tidy red mark at the wash of water and the slump of shoulder, suspiciously textbook for something that hadn't felt like a textbook at all. The manufacturer's app pinged, a message from support. "We detected several unclassified objects between mile 14 and 13. Adjusting threshold for fog. Your speed and following distance were ideal. Thank you." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truck and the world had already had their say about it. At the distribution center, the receiving clerk scanned him in with the resigned grace of a person who has learned to keep mornings simple. "Quiet on the marsh?" she asked, tapping a key with 2 fingers. "Fog," he said. She nodded, eyes on the screen. "Always is. My uncle won't drive it after midnight. Says the crossings get active." "How do you mean?" He didn't set a tone in the question. He let the words stay flat and small. "The footpaths. From way back. People used to walk out along the boardwalk when the tide was low," she said. "There's still, like, heat shimmer from that in the air. At least, that's what he says. I don't know. I just like that the county put up those little reflectors. They feel like a breadcrumb trail." She printed his receipt and slid it across, eyes already on her next line. He parked and slept like someone who had decided a night needed to end gently. On the return run the following evening, He hit the causeway a little earlier. Fog had taken a night off. The moon hung out with a few stubborn stars. The marsh gave him its flat truth and its bird calls. He slowed at mid-span on purpose, reading the shoulder. The county had chalked a line where the slump had been, bright white on gray, and staked a warning sign that glowed honey under his lights. Should her damage use centerline? 2 orange cones stood in a courteous pair. He felt a small gratitude for human answers to questions the night asked first. The forward camera found nothing to bracket because nothing needed it. The lane keep watched and didn't speak. The CB carried someone mentioning a minor closure 2 towns away. Malik crossed, patient as a long breath held and let go. He did not always tell stories about his nights because stories sometimes put a price on things that happened freely. He did, however, keep a small ritual afterward. He made sure the sensitivity stayed where it was for the marsh. He took 1 mile per hour off his speed without telling himself he had, and he touched the dash with 2 fingers between the vents, as if greeting an old colleague in a hallway. Weeks later, while fueling, his phone lit with a text from an unknown number with no name attached. "Thanks for slowing at 14. Keep center." It could have been a dispatch mix-up. It could have been a prank. It could have been a neighbor on the volunteer channel forwarding advice to a list they didn't realize he was on. He typed nothing back and deleted it, not out of suspicion, but because some messages do their whole job in the time it takes to read them. He kept crossing the causeway, season to season, fog to clear, with the same polite habits. The marsh kept its sounds and its moods. If the dashcam bracketed a space ahead now and then, and if he answered with a slight easing of the pedal and a sharpened eye, it felt less like spook and more like the world continuing to be particular, asking a person to meet it where it was. And if the CB carried, sometimes very late, a voice saying, "Evening on the Sable," he let the greeting be a bell ring on black water, and answered he only way that made sense. Hand steady, speed steady, lane steady, carrying bread across a thin ribbon that had learned to balance weight and wonder without making a fuss. Story number 6. Naomi Park liked the kind of night that asked her to listen. She hauled sealed crates for lab suppliers, the kind of cargo that rode well if a person treated it like a quiet conversation. Her route tonight wound her off the interstate into the Appalachian folds, where the road tightened to 2 lanes, and the map went green, and then darker than green. Signs grew fewer and more particular. Along a creek that talked to itself in the dark, the pavement rose and turned, and rose again. At the crest of a hill, a wooden placard with reflective letters announced, "Entering the national radio. Quiet zone. Turn off transmitting devices." The second line carried small icons, a cell phone with a line through it, a little lightning bolt with a question mark. She had been through once in the day. At night, it felt like a library after hours. She tapped her phone into airplane mode, even though it hadn't found a bar in 20 miles. The CB sat dark. She dimmed her dash until the gauges wore a soft glow, the truck's interior no brighter than the shape of her hands at the wheel. Her headlights washed the road pale and then let it fall back into trees that held their breath. The first mile inside the boundary had the kind of silence that isn't empty. The tires hummed. The engine made its steady sentence. The refrigeration unit hummed behind her in a reassuring alto. Beyond that, nothing. No spill of music from a house. No distant small-town siren. No high threat of someone's television seeping through their walls into the night. Her ears found other things. An owl somewhere on a ridge. The small pop of cooling metal from a mailbox she passed. A green sign with a white arrow, and the words "Observatory Road" pointed her right. Her bill of lading read, "Green Bank Receiving, Building D, Gate 3. She had never delivered to an observatory. She had delivered to hospitals, to machine shops, to a museum once that paid her to bring something fragile, and then thanked her with coffee. This felt like driving into a story she'd read as a kid about giant dishes watching skies that people in cities forgot existed. Her phone, asleep, ticked once with a phantom notification, and then thought better of it. Her CB speaker, switch off, made a small thump as if a finger had tapped it. She said into the quiet gently, "You're fine." Because sometimes machines just wanted to know what they were supposed to be doing too. The road narrowed and ran a curve that lifted the horizon just enough to show her the outline of something taller than trees. It rose slow, scissored with beams, a pale bowl with its face turned a little away. Red beacons along its rim glowed steady, the way aircraft lights glow when they belong to something that intends to stay where it is. The dish did not feel menacing. It felt like a calm animal at rest. The nearer she came, the more she could sense its size, not with eyes but with a change in the air, the way a field feels like a field even with your eyes closed. At the perimeter, what looked like an old guard hut lit up from inside as she rolled onto the apron. The light didn't flare. It settled. A low amber lamp clicked on over a sign that said, RF Patrol Stop for Check. Beneath it, instructions simple enough for tired brains. Headlights low. Engine idle. No honking. Use phone at post. A blue weathered call box stood beside the hut, the kind with a black handset and a metal cord. She stepped down into air that smelled like cold leaves and damp wood. The handset had a weight to it that felt like the right choice in this place. She lifted it. For a second, the line gave her the clear nothing of a good connection. Then a voice spoke. The kind of voice that you trust in underpasses and at temporary signals. In no hurry to show off. Receiving, it said. Westbound tractor with lab freight? Yes, Naomi answered. Park Logistics. Gate 3. Thank you, the voice said with the exact shape of courtesy that makes the nervous system forgive itself for being awake. Please power down any transmitters you have. Bluetooth, hotspots, anything that thinks before you ask it to. Keep the engine at idle. When your mirrors flash, follow the arrow. Do not engage CB within the fence. My CB's off, she said. You're doing great, the voice said, as if she had passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Proceed to the amber arrow. Watch for deer. We've had a family along the maintenance lane this week. She cradled the handset and set it back in its saddle. Her mirrors flashed once, just once the way they do when a modern truck decides it would like to make a greeting to a module. She hadn't touched the switch. It was such a small thing you would have thought she imagined it. Ahead, a little arrow board on a stubby post swiped left to right, and then held a steady straight line. She took the lane. Inside the perimeter, lights wore amber sleeves as if told to be quiet. The dish loomed to her left now, its undersides a geometry of pale bones and steady joints. Something somewhere made a slow, careful noise like an old elevator going where it knows it should. She rolled over a grate that hummed a tiny chord. On her right, fields opened in dark strips between rows of low beams with electronics on their ends. Everything here was designed to notice what most places ignore. Her dash clock, which she had forgotten to look at, showed 1:29 and then showed it again 2 minutes later. The second hand stuttered, and then carried on sheepishly. The lane keep nudged her once as the road bent a polite tap, not a lecture. When she reached a little shed with a window and a sign that said Gate 3 check, the amber lamp over its door brightened a notch, as if realizing she had arrived. The window contained no person. Inside, a red phone sat in its cradle, a stack of paper on a clipboard lay neat, and a pair of boots under the desk told a different story about occupancy than the lack of a person did. A speaker at the corner of the roof clicked, and then chose words. Naomi Park, correct? The voice asked. The same voice. Grounded. Yes, she said, looking up at the little black dome, wondering if it could hear her, or if someone was reading her lips on a screen. Dock 4, the voice said. Back straight to the bumpers. Engine off. Doors closed. We'll unload from our side. No backup beeper if you can help it. I can, she said. Most newer units dimmed their alarms if asked. She toggled the switch that told hers to use the gentle tone. She rolled toward a building that had the dignity of an old-school gym brick honest. Doors well painted, a light over each bay instead of floodlights all around. The dock plates were already cracked, ready to rise under weight. When she set her brake and killed the engine, the world's quiet came in like a tide. The reefer unit throbbed on with its regulated hum, and then even that eased to a slower rhythm as the load sensors found the right setting. Through the dock door window, a figure moved. A hand appeared in the panes with a clipboard, silhouette paper, and fingers. A thumb lifted in the universal, "We've got it from here." She stayed in the cab. Instructions had been clear. Doors closed, engine off, let them handle their silence. She folded her hands in her lap and watched her breath on the window for no good reason other than to see if it existed. Her CB speaker, dark as a stone, ticked and spoke a phrase that did not feel like it came from her part of the world. Null at 73. Rotation in 3 minutes. The voice was a whisper without trying to be secretive. If it had been a film, an editor would have cut it. The night accepted it. Far out in the field, the dish lifted its face a degree and stopped. Then a degree more, an animal testing the air. She couldn't hear its motors. Not really. What she heard was the structure itself settling into its change. Small ticks, soft adjusting sighs like wood at a weather shift. The red rim light stayed steady. A smear of clouds slid along the sky, and then let stars back in between the bowl and the tree line. The speaker at the gate clicked again, as if deciding to be neighborly. "Do you have any devices with little screens still searching?" the voice asked. "Wearables? Key trackers?" "No," she said. And then, because honesty mattered more here than anywhere, "One fitness band. I can shut it down." "Please," the voice said. "Thank you." She powered the band off and set it beside the cup holder, a small dark crescent. The world changed by nothing perceivable except the feeling behind her ears eased. She didn't know a feeling could ease behind ears. She did now. Something thudded softly against her trailer, and then twice more in a deliberate pattern. The dock plate taking weight, she told herself. The rhythm, for one unreasonable second, matched the knock you use on a friend's door. She set her palms on her thighs to put the notion somewhere it couldn't get leverage. She watched darkness where her reverse camera usually showed her the dock. The screen in the dash, compliant with a no-transmit setting, stayed politely black. If she reached to poke it awake, it napped deeper, as if the truck itself had noticed the sign at the fence and opted to be a good guest. Good. She let it. When the dock light above her door flicked from amber to green, the green looked neither slippery nor bright. It looked like a permission someone had earned. She rolled forward to clear the plate. A man in a knit cap with a faded patch on the front, just the outline of a dish, no words, stepped into her headlight throw briefly and lifted a hand in thanks. She lifted hers back. He was gone in the next second, folded into the corner shadow where the building put its own darkness. The voice returned when her tires settled again at the check shed. "Back out to the lane," it said. "Turn right at the boardwalk. Take the old logging road, it's our detour around a power project. No phones, headlights low. If your CB picks anything up, ignore it. It's us talking to ourselves. Copy," she said. The habit came from nights where copying meant the world moved smoothly. She didn't reach for the CB to confirm it. She turned right when the sign said boardwalk, with an arrow that had forgotten to be repainted for a decade. The lane there was narrow enough that the edge of her trailer brushed tall grass. Below, in the hollow, the faint shape of an actual boardwalk showed planks in a line through low land, a visitor path for daylight. The logging road was newer gravel laid over old habits. Her tires made a sound with a rasp in it that said each stone had a shape. Tree trunks spaced themselves like pillars in a dark nave. She kept to dotting. 15, then 10, then let herself float at 9 when the grade tucked itself down, and then up like a breath held. Her CB speaker gave a single click like someone clearing their throat, and then a sequence of numbers said low and polite. 45, 43, 41. Hold there. Hold steady. Hold silent. She did not slow. She did not speed. The road taught her that an answer could be given with the way a vehicle moved and not with the mouth. The gravel ended where pavement resumed without warning. A wooden church with white paint that had aged into a shade paper does when a book is kept in the sun stood on a small rise. A signboard under a plexiglass cover read, "No service," with a smaller word underneath. Wednesday. A single porch light was on. It seemed to be lit for the benefit of the road as much as any person. As she passed the church, her dash made a noise she'd only vaguely heard before, a soft chime that belonged to a system no one advertises. Her lane departure lines winked and then reasserted themselves. Her blind spot indicator, which had been sleepy this whole hour, gave a quiet flourish and resumed, showing the emptiness beside her like a friend checking in. The boundary of the quiet zone was not marked by a line. It was marked by devices making up their minds to be noisy again. A sign, wooden and courteous, on the county line fence said, "Thank you for your quiet." The font had a curl to it that designers stopped using around the time she started driving. Her phone woke without asking. collected a stack of messages, and then did what phones do when forced to reconcile the now and the just before. She reached and pulled the ringer down to nothing. The truck felt better when the world came back gently. Miles later, at a plaza where daylight dives through the glass and onto racks of chips, she bought fuel and a coffee that tasted like heat first and flavor second. An older man by the sink at the back wiped his hands on a paper towel and glanced at her cap, a Dish logo she had not known she was wearing, until she realized she'd bought it in the day lobby when she'd had a day run through here months back. He said, "You come out of Green Bank tonight?" "I did," she said. No reason to hoard the fact. They run the sniffer after midnight, he said, not as gossip but as an unembellished sentence. Relays pick up anything leaky. Sometimes your speakers will pop at you. Don't worry at it, he added, as if the advice arrives as late as the worry. I didn't, she said. Worry at it. He smiled like a person who had been up too late for too many good reasons. You're fine, he said, echoing the exact shape of her own words to herself at the fence. There used to be a guy on patrol who kept a list of trucks with inverters that whined. He'd leave notes in glove boxes somehow. Never could figure how he got them in there. Probably didn't. Probably just told somebody who told you to check a fuse, and you went on your way. That's how it works out there. She carried her coffee back to the cab and found, sitting on the passenger seat where she had never left paper, a small card. Not new, not old. Laminated. The edges a little rough with use. Quiet zone courtesy card, it said. Then, in 5 tidy lines, dim interior lights. Disable transmitters. No horns. No beepers. Idle quietly. If you hear us on a dead radio, you're doing it right. No logo. No number to call. Just the card. She set it in the visor pocket as if that were the correct act, and felt her shoulders drop a notch. Not from relief, but from the pleasant weight of belonging to a small rule, obeyed well. On her return run, nearer dusk than dawn, she took the same road, and the Dish 2 counties worth of sky gathered into a gesture turned its face somewhere her headlights couldn't follow. The sign at the boundary glowed with the day's left light. She powered down out of habit before the sign told her to. The speaker on the gate was quiet. The call box didn't ring. The world accepted her like a sentence with the word already understood. Inside, the deer the voice had warned her about stood in a thin margin between lane and field. 3 of them, heads tilted as if they could hear more than she could. She didn't honk. She tapped the brake once, slow. They stepped into grass in the manner of beings who never needed to learn their bodies. Someone had chalked symbols on the pavement at the corner where she turned the circles and lines you see on a street the day before it changes. Instructions for crews who know how to read them. Here, the symbols looked older and less sure of which present they belonged to. She rolled over them and half expected her tires to catch chalk, the way kids leave traces on sidewalks elsewhere. They did not. Unloading went as before. The dock light, the knock of a plate, the silhouette of a hand, the sound of a very big structure being careful with its own attention. When she left, the lane between the boardwalk and the church seemed to remember her and made no new demands. Beyond the boundary, her CB off and left alone gave one last, almost apologetic word. Clear. Not a command. Not a report. A small closure, the kind a person murmurs when a good shift ends and the room has been swept. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She kept her hands at 2:45 and met the curves with the kind of respect that fits in the spine. The road out of the quiet had its own kind of noise house music from a porch, a dog letting a truck know about itself, a radio barely audible in a yard, and none of it felt careless. It felt like normal had rejoined her without being offended she'd left it. Weeks later, on a run that didn't need the mountains but took them anyway, she heard on a weather band a dry little note about auroras peaking south of latitude lines they usually ignored. The voice suggested dimming lights to see them better, and not to pull over on the highway for photos. She laughed quietly, alone, and thought of a Dish lifting its face to listen. The card in her visor stayed put. Once in a while when she cleaned the cab, she would take it out and set it on the dash, and then put it back, the way a person takes a photo out of a wallet and looks at it and says nothing. She said nothing about the voice that knew her name, or the pop of a speaker that had been turned off, or the way her mirrors had flashed without her giving them leave. She did, however, tell a new driver who was nervous about his first night across the hills that sometimes the world asks for a little more quiet than you planned, and that if a sign tells you to be a good guest on its land, You can take that as permission to make fewer noises with all your machines and with yourself." The driver nodded, as if she had told him how to run a tricky curve, and she supposed she had. And on nights when the interstate felt like a city, and the smaller roads felt like a favor granted, she took the old way down toward the country where signals did as they were told, and people did too. And the sky, free of shouting, gave her back the sound of tires on pavement, and gears choosing the humane version of their work. The dish, if she saw it, didn't say hello. It didn't need to. The red lights along its rim kept faith, and that was enough. Story number 7. Cal Whitaker knew the shape of the high plains at night. The road ran straight for a county, then bent around a windbreak and straightened again. And the horizon sat like a thin, dark lip he could sip from forever. Grain elevators rose like patient ships in a black sea. The air felt cold enough to ring. He was hauling dry goods toward a town that understood what midnight kept, and the interstate had folded itself into a detour resurfacing ahead, aeroboards stepping traffic off onto county roads. He didn't mind. He liked when the map sent him down lanes that remembered the original gravel beneath their asphalt. The message board before the exit read, "Night Detour Trucks Oak Wind District Access." Under that, red lights ahead. Calm speed. He eased off. Window cracked to hear if the world wanted to say anything about it. Beyond the ramp, turbines stood in regimented lines, blacker than the sky. The red beacons on their crowns blinking with that slow airport rhythm. He'd driven past them by day and by dusk, but this was different, mile after mile of tall machines breathing the wind and writing their presence on the night in. Flashes. He took the county lane. It wasn't narrow, just honest, no shoulder to spare, a white line that minded its business. Signs told him what the power company wanted from guests. No stopping under rotors. Low beam and strobe zones. Use turnouts if disoriented. The last made him smile without mockery. He'd heard of shadow flicker causing trouble at sunset. He hadn't thought about it at 1 a.m. The first towers rose close to the road, their tubes pale ghosts. He felt the movement of the blades as a suggestion rather than a sight. A broad, silent slicing that made the air feel organized. The red beacons didn't flash together. They ran a lazy wave down the line and back again, as if some giant hand were knocking on the sky from a distance, patient and sure. His dash clock read 1:14. The reefer behind hummed like a contented creature. The road sounded like a thread pulled through cloth. 2 miles in, the shoulder posts began to carry small squares of reflective tape that caught his beams and gave them back to him a heartbeat, later than he expected, just enough of a lag to feel like the road had grown a long breath. He checked the speed, dropped 1 mile per hour, and let habit do the sorting. Out the side window, a tumbleweed rolled and gave up. The turbines bent to the wind and did not tire. Then the strobe began. It was a simple thing. A bank of towers set closer than the rest. Their blades aligned with the lane. The red lamps blinked as one for a minute, then broke apart, then came back in concert, all red eyes winking a solemn yes, yes, yes. The space between flashes became a room. The road flickered pale, dark pale as his beams found a moving screen of blades ahead and lost it again. It wasn't dangerous. It was just more sensation than a human needs all at once. Cal felt his eyes trying to make a pattern out of it. He told them not to. He aimed his attention lower, toward the right-hand line, toward the cat's eyes, toward the world that kept still. A sign ahead announced in calm block letters, "Strobe zone 2 miles. Use visor." The kind of instruction written by someone who had done this route in a pickup and thought, give them a tool. He flipped his sun visor down, ridiculous in the dark until it wasn't. It shaved the top inch off his windshield, where the strobes danced most, and left him a calmer strip of forward view. His AM radio, off, made a quiet, almost social click in its guts, the way old electronics sometimes sigh when the weather changes. He ignored it. A turnoff appeared with a sign above it like a friend's porch light. Turn out 6 reset zone. If disoriented, park here. 30 seconds, then continue. He wasn't dizzy, but he respected the existence of that feeling in the toolkit. He held the lane. At the crest of a mild rise, a pair of amber flashers pulsed ahead at knee height. For a second, his brain read hazard lights on a vehicle angled crossways. Then the road offered the truth. A maintenance cabinet on a pad, its reflectors catching a turbine's blink and answering out of phase. He breathed out once, amused at the way attention makes puppeteers of inanimate objects. "Nice try," he told the knight. The knight made no case. He came to the narrowest point. A service lane crossed under two towers so near to the county road, their bases felt like neighbors at a fence. The wind chose that moment to quicken. The blades turned faster, but not dangerously fast. The strobes synchronized of their own accord. Pale, dark, pale rhythm filled the cab through the windshield, under the visor, in the rear-view mirror, where the world's heartbeat adopted seconds for music. Cal found the right shoulder edge with his eyes and kept them there. 5 seconds, 8, 10, then flicked them to the center line to rinse the nerves and back again. The truck held steady because that was what he asked of it, and it had no reason to refuse. A small sign fixed to a post at the road edge looked old but not neglected. "If you need a count, take 4. He did. Not out loud, but in a way, the body hears. The strobes fell out of step as he passed the second tower, like a crowd deciding to stop clapping in unison. Relief came not as a feeling, but as an absence of what had taken its place. The road returned to being a road. The wind farm, which had not been menacing, returned to being entirely indifferent. Ahead, a white pickup idled on a gravel apron, its hazard lights off, its reflectorized vest draped over the seat back like someone had stopped to breathe. A man stood by the hood drinking from a thermos. He didn't wave. He inclined his head the way people do when acknowledging another worker on the late shift. Cal's own head answered without needing a meeting. On the pickup store, a faded logo showed a stylized turbine and the legend, Night Ops. No slogan. He had never seen that division on the daylight trucks. The detour turned left, then right, then ran straight again through another seam of towers. The signposts had stories to tell. Do not park under blades. No engine brakes. Birds active at dawn reduce speed. A sticker beneath one carried a smaller, more personal addendum in Sharpie. Thanks. He felt something like disorientation come and go in the space of a heartbeat at the exact halfway point. 2 red beacons in his peripheral vision seemed closer than they could be. The sensation passed when he checked the mirrors and found nothing but night and his own steel catching light. He didn't give it power by naming it anything bigger. The detour rejoined a state road with a clover leaf that had been poured with a careful ribbon hand. As he climbed the ramp, a portable message board stood dark until his truck's nose lined up with it, at which point it woke to life. Thank you for safe speed through the wind district. Amber flashers are for you. He smiled at the silly intimacy of the sentence and kept going. Miles later, the interstate took him back without apology. The tires sang the song of concrete sections again. The stars drew a grammar above him, simple enough to follow. He set the cruise and let his shoulders settle one notch. You never notice until it releases. At a service plaza an hour beyond the farm, he fueled among the ordinary noise, the hiss of diesel, the soft clink of a nozzle returning to its cradle, a driver laughing quietly on a phone about some detail of a day. Inside, the coffee urns stood like silver pillars, and the cashier's wrist tattoo, 2 small windmills, made him look twice. He asked nothing. She told him anyway. Take the detour through 7 Hills tonight? She said, as if reading the dust on his bumper. I did, he said. New signs helped? She asked, eyes on the register, sounding like someone checking on an idea she'd sent into the world. They did, he said. The visor trick. She smiled. That was Leon. He gets dizzy easy and is brave enough to say it. Some of the night guys used to get stuck pulling over under the flicker. They figured out if you give people permission to stop or to change the frame a little, they do fine. He thought of the pickup and the thermos and the man who did not wave. He thought of the little sign that had asked him to count to 4. He paid and left, hands warmer on the cup now, not because of the heat, but because the night had admitted its own tricks and offered solutions in the same breath. On a delivery dock at dawn, the receiver, a woman in a heavy hoodie, signed his paper and said, You come in from west? Did you see the towers dance? She said it the way people ask whether the moon looked good from your side of town. He answered in a way that put no shine on it. They blink, he said. Sometimes together. She nodded like that was enough to say. On the return run a week later, the detour wasn't posted. The interstate ran clean. Off to the south, the wind district lit its string of red lanterns along the horizon. He watched them with the respect you give something that could unsteady your feet if you stare too hard. There was a turnout at mile marker 212 he hadn't noticed before. A metal placard at chest height read, "Shadow break pullover to reset. Free coffee ahead." It was somebody's joke, and somebody's practical gift glued together. He didn't need it. It helped anyway, as ideas go. Back at his yard the next morning, he wiped dust off his visor and found a single orange earplug tucked into the edge of the plastic, the kind maintenance hands wear. He could have knocked it loose, himself at some earlier stop. He set it on the dash, small and bright and useless on its own, but not nothing. He did not tell a story about the night to anyone who wanted the kind of story that made rooms lean in. He kept the details in the part of his head where tools live. The next time a rookie asked what to do about the long blink of tower lights, he said, "Aim low. Use the visor. Count to 4 if it jumps your eyes. If you need a minute, turn out 6 is there. Don't stop under the blades. And make sure your coffee's on a lid because the flicker will make you think your hand is moving when it isn't." He crossed that county many times afterward, and the fields kept turning wind into something a town could use, and the lights kept telling the sky honest things about where tall structures lived. Sometimes the beacons kept time together, and sometimes they didn't. Either way, he thought of the small line on that message board, "Calm speed," and understood that calm can be a practice thing, available in places where a person might not expect to be offered any. The road took his rig past the farms, and the towers set their faces into the moving air. And miles later, long after the blinking had left the cab, a soft afterimage of a red dot blinked once in his mind, and then went out, as if the night were reminding him of a chore finished properly. Story number 8. Tessa Calder hadn't planned on heading into the patch after midnight, but the call came with the kind of urgency that puts a gear behind the ribs. A compressor station out on the leases had gone dark. They needed a mobile generator big as a small room, and they needed it now. She hooked the flatbed under the orange sodium lamps of the yard, ran her straps with gloves squeaking over webbing, and checked the taglines twice. It wasn't her usual freight. She hauled groceries and palletized goods most weeks, but she'd done enough oilfield nights to know that everything out there had directions in code, mileposts that were really lease numbers, turns named for the pump jacks that leaned there years ago and had been moved since. The map their dispatcher sent looked like someone had drawn it during a good story. County Road 11 to lease 7 to 14. Take the Kalish service lane past the twin flares, left at the green water tank, right at the weather station mast. Tessa kept 2 maps, one on the ELD, one paper, and creased into a square that held memories of other nights. She slid the paper into the door pocket and let the ELD do its glow as a suggestion, not a rule. The sky over the basin was an inverted bowl of graphite, stars bitten out where flares burn tall. Wind rolled low and constant, more an idea than a force, carrying the mineral smell that sits on the back of the tongue. Her radio was quiet. She kept low beams and a light hand on the wheel. The county road gave way to Kalishe, white, dusty, loud, like walking across hard-packed sugar. Signs trained in the headlights. Lee's traffic only. No idling at fence. Watch for soft shoulders. H2S aria call, in before entry. At the gate, a chain link section with a painted number 7 to 14 rose on a motor that sounded polite and unexpectedly new. The keypad glowed beside it. A laminated instruction card hung from a wire. After hours use, call post. Tessa stepped down, boots taking the Kalish with a soft crunch. The call box looked old in the way. Field gear looks old. Painted a dozen times, housing intact, handset heavy. She lifted it and waited. "Gatehouse," said a voice with no static and no need to explain itself. "Unit with generator? On the manifest for Station Grackle?" "That's me," Tessa said, trying not to be relieved that someone had named what she was. "Calder Transport. Permits on the dash. Thank you. Keep windows up. HVAC on recirc. Follow the stake line with blue tape. Do not drive on mats with yellow flags. Bear right of the green tank. If your CB speaks without being on, ignore it. We'll lift the second gate." He didn't ask her name. He already knew enough. She hung up and climbed back in. Her hand moved to the HVAC dial without thinking. Click to recirc. The gate swung wide. Beyond it, the lease road ran pale and firm, the edges softened into powder by the last week's traffic. On either side, pump jacks worked their quiet workhorse heads, nodding in slow subservience to pressure and orders. Flares marked the horizon like fixed stars. A coyote crossed 100 yards ahead. No hurry, as if this were its right of way and Tessa merely used it with permission. Blue tape fluttered on waist-high stakes to her right. Yellow flagged mats lay to her left, wooden platforms, knitted together like giant placemats bridging low spots. She let her right tires walk the line of blue and mined the firm ground. The generator thumped behind her in its crate, a weight that felt like the word responsibility spelled with torque. Her dash clock read 126, then thought about being 126 for a little while, then rolled to 127. The CB, off and uninterested, clicked as if a fingernail had touched its casing. Then a voice arrived that didn't belong to weather or the friendly churn of daytime chatter. Lease Road 7 to 14 West. Keep to the berm. Soft patch at the old fire break. Copy? She didn't move for the mic. The voice didn't need her to. It carried on. You'll see a green tank. Salt scum around the base. That's your right. Left is the weather mast. It isn't for you. Don't drive under it. She eased off 2 miles an hour. Ahead, the green tank rose from the dark like a sleeping whale. The salt crust around it glowed under her lights, a white ring where brine had kissed the caliche and dried. Beyond, the thin mast of a weather station stood like a thread pulled skyward. Guy wires singing a wire song she couldn't hear, but felt in her neck muscles. She kept right like a person at a polite dinner. At a split where the road looked the same in both directions, 2 solutions presented themselves: a spray-painted arrow on a rock pointing toward a line of flares, and a small reflectorized sign with numbers that matched the last 2 digits on her manifest. The sprayed arrow felt like a friend with bad ideas. She chose the sign. The flares punched the night into submission in that quarter of the field, tall stacks pluming gold-white. Their light made the shadows weird, long and short at once, moving in time with the air you couldn't feel through the glass. For a second, the silhouette of a worker in a hooded jacket seemed to unfold from the fence by her right mirror, hand raised, palm out. Tessa's heart did a thing hearts do when they see a person where only chain link should be. She blinked. The shape dropped back into shadow, an illusion made of welded joints and flicker. She kept moving. The stake line kept winking. Blue. 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 A portable message board sat on a trailer tongue half-cocked beside the road. It had been dark until her bumper lined up with it. Then letters traced themselves onto its face. 3 words at a time, calm as a hand on a shoulder. Slow here. No lane change. Recirc on. She thought about blowing past it. The field did not need her to obey courtesy signage intended for day crews. But something about the board's lazy certainty made her treat it like a colleague, and she did as it asked. The road dipped and rose crookedly, rising onto a levee of dirt that bridged a marshy swale. Her headlights caught a sign, unlit but bright, in the way the world can be generous. Pipeline heave zone, no axle loads over 20 kelvins. Single-use center span only. She put her steering on a string and slid the tractor and the generator over the middle, all her weight honest and quiet and in one place. Beyond, the caliche resumed its flat confidence. Good line, said the voice in her cab, not loud, as if it was speaking to itself and allowed her to overhear. Crossing secured. Keep going. Don't climb to the tank battery. We know the temptation. Head for the light tower cluster and take the twin track left. She wanted to ask how far to the station. Instead, she watched the light towers bloom out of the dark, their diesel hearts thudding, their poles holding banks of lamps that turned dust into haze. In that haze, a shape moved fork tines, the stubby nose of a loader. Then it wasn't moving. It was parked, and her eyes had let the flicker turn it into a worker again. She had a laugh in her throat, and let it stay there. Small. A chain-link fence with a yellow sign, compressor. Station Grackle rose into view. The gate was already open, held by 2 concrete-filled drums someone had rolled into place. On the fence, a placard with simple rules. No open flame. No phones. Windows up. Sound horn for entry. The last line made her smile and then not. The sign had a smudge through that instruction, as if someone had remembered horns carry further than permission here. Her finger hovered over the air horn pull. She let it fall back to the steering. The station yard was poured concrete, clean and hard. Valve trees stood like neat sculptures behind guardrails. The compressor house glowed under emergency lighting blue-green runner lights along the baseboards. No people in the windows. A red beacon at the roofline spun. A slow, committed circle. A hand-lettered note on the gate guard's window faced the yard. Back in 5. A pair of work boots under the desk. Said 5 could be relative. She idled where a loading stripe met a dock face painted with black and yellow chevrons. The edge of the dock held a chain. The chain dropped on its own, a powered laziness, and the dock plate rose. She never heard a forklift. She felt the whisper of transfer weight traveling away, straps slackening in stages. She kept her hands in her lap, and her eyes on the strip of yard visible through her windshield. Because the rules here were about lines and quiet, and trusting that other hands were as careful as yours. Something tapped her cab door. Soft. Twice. The kind of knock you use, so you don't startle. When she glanced over, a laminated card had slipped under the weather strip, held by a strip of blue tape. She cracked the window half an inch and slid it in. The card had 5 bullets. HVAC on recirc. Windows up. Do not use phone. Lights low. If CB speaks with the switch off, you're inside the net. She put the card on her dash, waited with a pen. Her phone, face down and in airplane mode, hummed once then. Thought better of it. As if the room had shushed it. Unload complete. The voice arrived. Not from the gate speaker now. Not from any one place. The dock light clicked from red to green, and green felt like the right word for it. Route out will not be your route in. Follow orange tape this time. Do not cross the drainage behind the tank farm. The berm is stressed. The orange tape fluttered on a different set of stakes. She eased out, careful narrating each decision to herself under her breath. Left of the red metal tool shed, right at the spool yard, straight across where tire tracks had made darker lines in the dust. The field showed its own grammar when you respected it. She took it at its word. On the way out, somewhere between the twin flares and the weather mast, her CB set tired, off, not interested, whispered one number. 9. Then silence. She didn't turn it on. She didn't ask it to try again. At the gate, the chain link swung as if someone was ready for her, the motor sounding like a yawn on a polite person. County road came under her tires like a memory you didn't know you'd been missing. The wind had shifted a degree. Somewhere to her right, a flare coughed and regained its breath. She ran the mile markers soft, easing back onto public land. At the all-night spot where rigs and pickups parked under a canopy rumpled with moths, a man in a reflective jacket and a hat with a frayed patch white bull skull. No words stood by the coffee island. He had the polite look of someone who had worked outside of people and then walked into a room without wanting it to notice. He glanced at Tessa's boots, then at the dust line on her jeans. "You come out of Grackle?" he asked, like asking if she'd driven through rain. "Yeah," she said. "They get you through around the slump?" he asked. "Old firebreak gave up last week." "Orange tape," she said. A voice at the gate. He nodded, amused and not surprised. "We keep eyes out," he said. "The basin's good at moving its own furniture when you blink. Better to tell a person than pick them out of a hole. Scare is cheap, courtesy's free." He left with 2 coffees and a box of donuts. A night hand. She took hers to the truck and sat in the cab a minute longer than she needed, letting the generatorless flatbed feel like a lighter future instead of a heavier past. On the passenger seat, she found a small clip. It was the kind you pin to a shirt when you walk on a site, a 2-inch badge with a little circle that goes green when air is good and black when air is not. The letters on it spelled H2S. The dot was green. A date in small numbers along the bottom edge read like the day that was just barely still the day. She rolled it between her fingers and put it in the pocket in the visor with her spare fuses. It wasn't hers, not really. It didn't feel stolen. It felt loaned. In the morning, local news on the gas station's wall screen showed footage of a lease road where a cattle guard sat at a wrong angle. "Overnight slump near section 14, the ticker read. No injuries. Gatehouse rerouted night traffic. Tessa sipped coffee and made a small sound her mouth makes when things line up right. And no one needs to be told they almost didn't. Back on the interstate, she joined the stream like a fish who has been in a different river and remembers how this one runs. The basin faded into a line of flares in the rear view, and then into nothing a rear view can hold. Her phone came out of airplane mode because other sections of the world ask that of you, and a message from dispatch arrived with a plain sentence. "Thanks." She typed nothing back and rolled on. Later, when a new driver asked her what it's like to take a generator out there at night, she didn't talk about voices from dead radios or gates that knew your manifest by the weight on your axles. She said, "Close your vents, follow tape, obey the signs even if they look bossy, and trust that somebody's watching the road so you don't fall through them. If you think you see someone by the fence waving you down, aim your headlights lower. He's probably a shadow with a job to do." And if her CB, on a different night through a different field, whispered a number with the switch still off, she'd leave it be and take the next turn that fluttered with blue tape, because a place like that doesn't ask for belief so much as compliance, and if you give it that, it returns you to County Road as promised, with the green dot still green and the quiet part of the night intact. Story number 9. Javier Ochoa took the Mesa Road because it was honest. The interstate made a long arc far to the north. Down here, the 2 lanes stuck to the benchlands, and the stony wash, like a respectful guest. His trailer held boxes of greens bound for a desert town that woke early to beat the heat. Between towns, the highway paralleled an old railroad grade, the rails gone for a decade but the ties still shouldering through dust, a stitch of history running beside him. Midnight had settled into its steady hour. The sky was a bowl with too many stars to count, and just enough wind to make the creosote scent travel. He kept the dash low, the CB off, the cruise a shade under the limit because night likes that from drivers. His headlights found jackrabbits at the shoulder and sent them back into the sage. Signs got sparse in particular. Low shutter, open range, flash flood area. Then unexpectedly a wooden post with a faded W flashed by on the right. He knew that letter from elsewhere. A whistle board for trains that no longer ran. Ahead, the silhouette of a crossbuck rose, where the road crossed the ghost of the tracks. Reflective paint, still bright as bone. He smiled to himself at the thought of slowing for a trainless crossing, and slowed anyway out of habit. The asphalt dipped, leveled, climbed over ballast that hadn't known steel in years. A slender set of masts stood at the edges. Their lights were dark. A sign below the crossbuck read, "Exempt." The word used to mean buses and tankers didn't have to stop here anymore. No one had to stop here anymore. He rolled over the ribs of old ties buried under thin surfacing and listened to the way the sound changed and then returned. The night caught the small noise and put it back where it belonged. 10 miles later, the land folded into a shallow canyon, basalt walls softened by time and brush. Somewhere a mile ahead, a low wash ran across the old rail bed, and then under the highway through a culvert. In daylight, the place was pretty. In night, it felt like a thought that kept itself small. He saw the crossbuck of the next crossing shining ahead, and let his foot ease the rig's weight a measure. Then the bells began. He hadn't heard that sound in a decade at least, the precise clatter of a grade crossing bell. Not a phone ringtone, not a tire dragging a grate, an actual bell with a tidy rotary insistence. Clang, 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 steady as a heartbeat, bouncing off basalt and brush. He felt it as a vibration in his ribs before his brain unboxed it. His hands floated a shade tighter on the wheel. The masts at this crossing wore modern heads that should have been dark forever. Now their lenses glowed red and pulsed. The gates that had no business being whole, lowered in a clean arc and caught their latches with a click he could hear. Javier braked as if he could see a patrol car ahead. Smooth, predictable, steady. The trailer tucked in behind him like a polite partner. He stopped 20 feet short of the gate, engine at a calm idle, the smell of hot brakes smelling like nothing because he hadn't needed them hard. He looked left out of habit, saw only the ink of the old right-of-way. He looked right, the same. Dusty ties under sage. No rails. No headlights coming along a path only ghosts could take. A whisper crept through his cab from nowhere mechanical. It wasn't the CB, its switch lay flat and disinterested. It wasn't his phone face down, asleep. It sounded like a voice heard through a wall in a hotel, words shaped and softened by distance. Milepost 349, Canyon Wash, crossing armed. Hold your line, driver. Do not proceed. He didn't think to answer. The instructions slipped perfectly into the space where the body waits to make a decision. He put the truck in neutral and set the brake, a statement to himself more than any system. In the quiet between bell strokes, he heard something else. A low rumble, not internal to the cab, not the endless note of the reefer, not wind. It threaded up from the canyon. The sound made a shape in his head. He knew rockfall from mountain passes, its coarse rattle, its irregularity. This was different. It was earth, moving as one mind. It came closer, and then stopped. The bells kept time, and in their regularity, he found the nerve he needed to do nothing. The red lights painted the basalt with blushes. Beyond the gates, the ground rose a few feet where the old railbed met the edge of the wash. He saw what the headlights made of that rise, a new curve to the shadow, a thin line of pale grit where there hadn't been any, the sort of change a daylight eye would read as nothing at all. At 1 a.m, with bells telling a past to a present, it read as a warning. His dash clock read 1:22. Then 1:22 again. He didn't look at it a second time. He watched the crossing and listened to the way the bells made the canyon air feel awake. He pictured, involuntarily, a locomotive's nose wearing a high beam like a small moon, a horn held to a long, true note. He'd crossed enough live lines in earlier years to have a body memory of that sound. Out here, memory was enough to keep him company. When the rumble came again, it brought a visible answer. A smear slumped down from the wall beside the old railbed, filling its trench like a careful hand smoothing a blanket. Dry brush rode the slide for 5 lazy feet and then stilled against the crossing's far edge. Dust lifted in a polite plume and drifted into his lamps. A chunk the size of a suitcase rolled once, twice, and kissed the road exactly where his steering would have placed his front left tire. It stopped with the decorum of something that had remembered its manners at the last second. The bells rang on. The red lights held, then slowed, as if someone somewhere let a hand hover above a switch. The right-hand gate unlatched and rattled 2 inches, then settled without rising. A second voice arrived, rounder, older, a tone that belonged to a person good at trains and storms. Detector. Mile 348.9. Slide in the gully. Crossing protected. All traffic stand by. Javier sensed he had a few choices. He could turn around, inch backward along the shoulderless 2-lane, until he found a turnout and crawl the long way. He could pull up and try to wiggle his hood past the lowered gate like a trick, or he could accept the simplest truth of the night. Something had asked him to wait, and the asking had come with bells and lamps and a rock doing him the courtesy of showing its weight in a place he would have been. He waited. The reefer hummed. The wind whispered sage on the edge of the door. Far up the mesa, some animal made a single remark and decided the conversation was over. He felt the road's temperature through his palm on the wheel. He breathed. He thought of the devices that still mutter to themselves long after the people who built them have been paid and sent home. A beam of light appeared behind him at ground level, as if a flashlight had been set down and left to think. Then he caught the shape in the mirror. A high-rail truck, one of those pickups that can drop steel wheels and ride rails, eased along the old grade from the south, its little lanterns neat against the ties. It rolled to the edge of the wash, stopped, and sat listening. On its roof, a whip antenna trembled like a tuning fork. The bells stuttered, stopped, resumed once more like a teacher clearing their throat. The high rail's door opened. A figure in a vest stood with the particular posture of someone deciding whether to move a thing or not. The person lifted a hand in Javier's direction, palm down, and pushed the air stay. The push carried the kind of authority adults learn when they spend their nights in places where mistakes cost more than time. He stayed. After a minute that felt longer, the person walked to the base of the right mast and put their hand on the metal in a way that suggested either affection or calibration. The mast's reds softened. The gates lifted, a half, and then a half. No drama. The figure pointed to the center of the lane and traced a path up over the hump of gravel that had crept onto the road, their forefinger making a tiny topographic map in the air. Javier nodded a nod that put him inside whatever system was running here. He rolled forward in the gear that felt most thoughtful and walked the tractor through the place where the rock had stopped. Pebbles popped under his tires. The trailer followed with the smooth grace of a thing towed by someone paying attention. As he cleared the far edge, the high rail flashed its amber bar twice, not at him, but at the night. The bells ceased as neatly as they'd started. Silence returned like a tide reversing. The red lamps went to a dark that felt earned. Javier eased the rig into the next 100 feet of road, and only then let air out of his lungs in that long, elastic way the body knows when it has skipped some steps. A mile on, a turnout offered a borrowed slice of the starfield above, and he took it. He stepped down to check his straps and his tires, and to remind his legs what ground felt like. In the quiet, old words rose out of nowhere, the way a memory does when the exact prop is present. Defect detector. Milepost 348.9. A recorded voice said in his head. The cadence of 1,000 railfans' videos and scanners. No defects. He smiled because out here, the defect had been real, and the detector had still done its work, whoever or whatever the detector was now. At Dawn's cuff, in the receiving bay of a grocery warehouse at the edge of the desert town, a clerk with a ball cap and a radio clipped to his belt looked up when Javier mentioned the slide. On the old Rio Mesa spur? The clerk asked, fingers pausing over a barcode. You get stopped by the fancy gates? They were fancy enough, Javier said, hitching one shoulder. The clerk laughed, not unkindly. County keeps the crossing gear on batteries for storm days. Some volunteer rail guys babysit the circuits. They say it keeps the ghosts from walking. He stamped the bill. Me. I'm just glad the rocks picked their timing. On the way back, daylight made the crossing ordinary again. Gravel pressed into the asphalt showed fresh gray on one corner. The high rail truck had left prints on the ties like animal tracks. The masts stood quiet. A small sign had been zip-tied to the post since the night. Caution slide history moved slow. It was a human sentence. It would do. Javier didn't tell the bigger version of the story. He didn't need to. He filed it where good routes live and bad chances don't. And when he passed the next empty crossbuck miles down the road and saw the sun turn its white paint to something like milk, he dipped the rig's speed a hair anyway, out of respect for machines that do their work after their work has technically ended, and for a bell that still knew how to ring when a driver needed to hear it. Story number 10. Luca Paredes planned to park just long enough to turn a half hour into a better dawn. He'd been pushing through the high basin since midnight, reefer steady, tires drumming the plane like fingertips on a table. A light snow sifted down, not enough to be trouble, just enough to turn the shoulder posts into white pencils that wrote the lane for him. When the sign for the Grand Plateau rest turnout appeared open parking, building closed for renovation, he took it, flicked his signal, and let the ramp draw him into a little circle of light in a vast calm dark. The building was wrapped in plywood and plastic, scaffolding banded with caution tape that fluttered like narrow flags. Sodium lamps hummed, throwing a buttery glow on the blank walls. The lot was half plowed, edges soft with powder. He slid into a spot at the far end, nose toward a long construction barrier. 12 white panels bolted in a row, nothing printed on them yet. The reefer hummed behind him, the sound that means everything in the cold is as it should be. He set the brake, dimmed the dash, and let the quiet put a hand on his shoulder. He was pouring a thermos cap of coffee when one panel of that barrier changed. It didn't move. It became useful. A pale square woke on its surface. The way a screen wakes when a projector finds it. The source wasn't obvious. No bright bulb, no portable rig on a tripod, just a soft rectangle growing out of white. Images formed with the warmth of old film. A plow angling snow off a two-lane. A close-up of a tire rolling over a sheen you could miss if you were proud. Lettering followed, steady, centered, and analog in its rhythm. Winter Operations. Film archive. Then, in tidy block text, expansion joints mile. 239. River Flats Bridge Black Ice Common, 04. Luca sat forward without meaning to, coffee forgotten. There was no sound, only the hum of lights and the mild breath of wind. But the film didn't need voices. It showed what mattered. Where black ice likes to live, what it looks like when it's pretending not to exist. How headlights flatten it into a tell you can train your eye to notice. It showed a truck taking a bridge a little too confident and correcting gently, perfectly because the driver had held back 2 miles per hour, for no reason anyone could see but him. He checked his watch. 1:48. He knew that bridge. Everyone on this route knew that bridge. He'd met it flush, and he'd met it forgiving. He took a swallow of coffee and let it tell him to pay attention. The silent reel slipped to crosswinds. A lonely overpass with snow curling like spun glass under it. Then to drifts that build on the lee side of a median. Then a frame of a hand around a wheel at 10 and 2 with the jaw unclenched. Each cut landed clean and unhurried, like a teacher who had figured out the power of letting the room breathe. A snowplow eased through the turnout, orange beacon stroking the lot in a lazy circle. The glow on the panel didn't blink, but for a second the plow blade's shadow slid across the film and gave the scene a heartbeat. Luca could have told himself it was a work crew testing equipment, a safety week presentation set to loop. He didn't need to decide. He watched until the end card appeared. "Thank you for holding a little back." The white returned to being just white. The panel became a panel again. He sat with the feeling the film left behind, not urgency, not omen, just that low, kind request a good night makes. Keep it generous. He set a timer and closed his eyes. Snow hissed softly at the glass. Somewhere a generator throbbed behind the Renault fence. Slow, methodical. The kind of note that lets a person sleep. When the alarm tapped his phone awake, he felt better than a half hour usually earns. He checked the straps in the cone of his headlamps, brushed powder from the deck, climbed back in, and rolled out into a world that had decided to be a little lighter. He hit the ramp, merged, and let the road climb toward the river flats. The sky to the east had the first thin suggestion of a seam. He traced the white edge, the dashed center, the cat's eyes winking in pairs on the joints. A message board a mile before the bridge announced wind advisory use caution. The film added subtext his eyes couldn't ignore now. Look where the shadows tilt. Look for that gray tint that's less like water and more like a memory of it. On the approach, he dropped 2 miles an hour. Not much. Enough. The deck looked ordinary. Then, at the first expansion joint, a patch paneled up under his beams, the sort of half-handprint of ice that's there and not there in the same breath. The wheel went just a shade whispery in his hands. He didn't brake. He didn't flinch. He let the truck do what trucks do when you give them a chance to be their best selves. Across his mirror, headlights appeared small, high, a car catching up in the left lane. It nosed forward, thought better of it, tucked behind, read his pace like a lesson. Together they crossed, 2 lengths of metal moving with the same caution for a minute. At the far end, the car flashed a thank you blink, a little white phrase that meant we both saw what we saw. At the next fuel stop, heat rolled off the coffee urns and thawed his face. On the bulletin board above the microwave, a poster hung under plastic. Winter driving Safety Week. The photo showed a plow, a bridge, a hand on a wheel at 10 and 2. Down in the corner, small text read, Archival Program Materials courtesy of .archives. The date at the bottom was years old. The clerk, wearing a knit cap inside like a polite rebellion, said, "Oh yeah. They used to show old reels on a sheet at Grand Plateau when the Reno started. Kind of a pop-up. Somebody brought a projector one night and it stuck." He nodded, the way a person nods at a sentence that's both too much detail and not enough. Back at the truck, a folded pamphlet lay where his logbook, usually Saturday winter operations field notes. Inside, diagrams he had just watched became lines and captions. In the margin, a pencil mark circled mile 239. He hadn't put it there. He put the pamphlet in the door pocket like it had been assigned to him. He ran the route twice more that week, twice more at night. The turnout lay quiet both times, the panels white, the scaffolding breathing quietly, no gentle square blooming to offer civics. He didn't feel cheated. A good thing doesn't owe you repetition. But once, a week later, rolling later than usual with wind shouldering the trailer, a message board before the plateau popped on at his bumper. Words writing themselves as if to catch only his night. Drifts in medians ease left on crests. He eased left. A ripple of snow crossed the right lane like a cat, soft and insinuating. It licked the bumper and went harmless. By spring, the rest building opened shiny and bright. New tile, clean maps, a glass case with a short history of the area, stage routes, fires, the bridge that had replaced 3 smaller bridges a decade earlier. Tucked near the water fountain, a display case held a hand-labeled canister. Training real winter ops. A placard below read, "Shown here during renovation nights, thanks to the crew who kept the lights on." He stood a minute, watching people read the case, and then the view out the window, where the panels had been. Light came in on ordinary business. He didn't tell anyone about the quiet square that had turned a wall into a room he needed to sit in just then. He didn't need to. He kept the pamphlet in the door, and checked the joints on the river flats like a person checks a stove before bed. And when he saw a driver ahead of him drop 2 miles an hour for no visible reason and hold that line all the way to the far sign, he felt the peculiar comfort that comes when you recognize someone else has watched the same movie and decided to believe it. And now the road falls silent, the last engine hum fading into the dark. These 10 stories linger like echoes in the blank, rearview reminders of what the night holds between 1 mile and the next. Out here, the quiet has a voice, and it follows long after the headlights fade. Thank you for staying until the very end. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits in the dark. And like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Now, rest easy. Let the silence settle and drift into sleep. Good night.